The first thing I ever felt in this world was pressure. Not pain, pressure. Something curved and warm and completely solid, pressing in on every square inch of me at once, and no matter which way I pushed, it pushed back exactly as hard. I had no eyes yet, I had no hands, I had a heartbeat and I had opinions, and that was the entire list. The second thing I felt was sound. Sound travels beautifully through a shell. That's the part nobody tells you. Lying in the dark inside 4 inches of calcium, I could hear a man 3 rooms away clear his throat. I could hear a pen scratching. I could hear a door with a bad hinge open and close and open again. And I could hear a girl screaming. Not once, not like someone stubbed a toe. Every few days on a schedule, the way a factory whistle goes off on a schedule. Somebody would open that bad hinge door, somebody would say a number out loud, and then a girl would start screaming, and a man's voice would say, calm as a weather report, note the recovery rate. So that was my introduction to the world, a shell, a schedule, and a recovery rate. Let me back up exactly 1 sentence, because you deserve to know who was doing the listening. In my last life, I was a person. Normal person. Job, apartment, opinions about takeout. Then I stopped being a person in the boring way people stop, and I woke up as an egg the size of a wardrobe with 18 stone tablets scattered across an ocean I had never seen and no way to reach a single one of them. Those tablets were me. That's the part that took me a while to accept. Not my property. Me. 18 pieces of what I was supposed to be, blown across the planet on impact like a dropped bag of marbles, and every one of them that stayed lost was a piece of me that stayed missing. I had 2 left inside the shell, fire, and the plain white one that isn't any element at all. That was my whole inventory, 2 tablets and a bad attitude. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I could listen. So I listened for 11 months, and the men outside my shell were kind enough to explain the entire world to me while they worked, because nobody watches what they say in front of a rock. Here's what I learned. The thing in the room with me was called a lunarian. There used to be a lot of them. They lived up on a mountain nobody's allowed to climb. They had wings that made fire, and their hearts kept beating through injuries that would fold a normal man in half. They were treated like gods for a while, which is a lovely thing to be right up until somebody decides they'd rather own a god than pray to one. There was a war. Wars against gods are short. The winners took the mountain, and then, because they were thorough people, they took the survivors somewhere with good lighting and started writing things down. By the time I was listening, the entire species was 2 children. 2. A boy and a girl, both 14, both cataloged, both on a schedule. The men outside my shell had names for them, and the names were numbers. And I could not move. You want to know what 11 months of that does to a person? It doesn't make you sad. Sadness needs somewhere to go. It just compresses. Every scream on the schedule went into the shell with me and stayed there, and I lay in the dark stacking them like firewood, and I got very, very quiet, and I got very, very ready. Then, on a completely ordinary evening, the bad hinge door came off its hinges entirely. Somebody had gotten out. The boy, Ethan, 14 years old, half his face wet with blood, dragging himself along a corridor lined with guards because the girl had another appointment in the morning and he had decided, apparently, that there wasn't going to be a morning. He got farther than anyone expected. He got all the way to my room, which was the deepest room, which tells you he had planned it. I heard the girl tell him to leave her, out loud, in the calm little voice of someone who has done the math on herself and doesn't like the answer. Go, I'll cover you. 14. I heard the man in charge give an order I will be repeating for the rest of my life. He didn't say, kill them. He said, take them alive. They're expensive. And something in the shell finally ran out of room. I want to be clear that I didn't decide to hatch. Deciding takes longer than that. 11 months of stacked firewood met 1 sentence about pricing, and the fire tablet inside me simply went off, and the shell came apart, and I opened my eyes for the first time in this world, directly into the face of a man holding a clipboard. He got half a syllable out. The bean took the clipboard, the man, the wall behind the man, 3 rooms, a load-bearing column, and most of a corridor, and kept going until it found weather. I hadn't aimed it. I didn't know how to aim yet. It just left, the way water leaves a burst pipe, and when the light stopped, there was a hole in the building, shaped like an opinion. Silence. Dust falling. Somewhere an alarm was trying to start and couldn't quite commit, and 2 14-year-olds staring at me because I was standing in the wreckage on 4 legs I had never used, and I had a ring around my middle like a wheel that had fallen off a chariot, and I was, from their point of view, a horse-shaped thing that had just deleted a corridor. I opened my mouth and found out I could talk. The first thing I said was a list of names. I didn't plan that either. 11 months of listening means 11 months of intake logs read aloud, and every name on those logs was a person who used to have wings. So I stood in the hole I'd made, and I said them, all of them, one after another, in order, and I watched 2 children's faces come apart while I did it, because nobody had said those names out loud since the men with clipboards started writing them down. The girl, Alara, was in bad shape, not bleeding out bad, Worse, the kind of quiet where the body has decided to stop filing paperwork. I put a hand on her, which is a strange sentence for something with hooves, and I gave her back some of what they'd taken, and she breathed properly for the first time in 6 months and immediately tried to stand up and fight me, which told me everything I ever needed to know about Alara. 2 tablets absorbed off the floor while I was at it. Fire and blank, both of them sitting in a specimen drawer, both of them cataloged, both of them mine. 4 in me now, 14 to go. Justice for Lunarian, I said, which I admit is a little theatrical. And then a very large man walked in through my hole in the wall and started laughing. He was young, big, horns, the kind of shoulders that make you reconsider doorways. He stepped over a piece of ceiling like it was a puddle, looked at the corridor I'd erased, looked at me, and laughed with his whole chest, and I understood immediately that this man had walked in here to rob the place and had found something much more entertaining instead. Ryuga, 20-something, not yet a legend, already a rumor, grew up in a kingdom that pointed him at battlefields at 10 years old, got sold to a prison ship by the same kingdom when he stopped being convenient, and had spent the years since escaping from things. Join me, he said. I said no. He tilted his head. In fairness to him, that word doesn't come up much in his life. I'll offer you a deal you can't refuse instead. And then, because he is who he is, he tried to take the deal by force, and we found out something interesting about each other. He hit me with the kind of pressure that puts a room full of grown men on the floor, that suffocating King's aura thing that says, lie down, you were never going to win. And it hit me, and it just sat there. Because I've got my own version of that, and mine's older, and mine doesn't come from being the strongest thing in the room. Mine comes from being the thing that made the room. 2 immovable objects staring at each other across a demolished laboratory, neither of us going down. He laughed again, turned into a dragon the size of a warehouse, casually, the way you'd shrug on a coat, and left through the ceiling. I let him go. I had one more thing to do. There's a weapon these people use when they want to erase a place, a fleet, a signal, and then the island isn't there anymore. It's supposed to take 10 warships. It took me about 4 minutes. I stood in the courtyard of that research institute and I called lightning down on it in a grid, methodically, building by building, until the last standing wall stopped standing, and when Alara asked me what I was doing, I told her the truth. Collecting interest. Because make no mistake, that was interest, not the debt. The debt lives at the top of a red wall on the other side of the world, and it is going to take me years. This was the finance charge. We walked out of there 3, me, a boy who'd stopped being a number, and a girl who kept trying to walk in front of me like I was the one who needed covering. On the boat out, I gave the boy his name back. Not the number, his actual name, Ethan. He turned it over a couple of times and gave it back. Call me Prince, he said. Fine, Prince it is. And when I offered his sister the same rank, the seat, the title, all of it, she looked at me like I'd offered her a hat. I don't want a rank, she said. I'm yours. Which is how I ended up, within 1 week of hatching, with a 14-year-old zealot, a 14-year-old with a torture streak he hadn't discovered yet, and no plan whatsoever. The plan showed up in a soup shop. Commercial island, red bean soup with rice cake, and a man the size of a shed sitting in the corner sulking into his bowl. Round, sunglasses, metal grafted into places metal doesn't belong. He introduced himself as Baron, informed us that he was a genius, and then explained at length that he used to be a genius on a government research team, right up until they disbanded it and he had to go be a genius somewhere with fewer amenities. You want to know how the Beast's pirates started? 2 things happened in that shop within about 90 seconds of each other. 1. Baron said something impolite in Alara's direction, and she kicked him through the door frame. Not out the door, through the frame. The shop owner started crying. 2. I found out Baron used to work on the exact research program that had my 2 kids in a drawer, and I did the arithmetic on whether to leave him in the wall. I didn't, because Ryuga had walked in behind him. Of course he had, and Ryuga was already 3 cups deep and crying about the soup, and while Prince and Alara were beating his scientist flat into the floorboards for the first of what I now estimate to be 400 times, I had an idea. I put my hand on Alara, and I gave her something. Not a weapon, not a drug, a shape, talons, feathers, and a very personal relationship with fire. All of it hers now, permanent, and when she stood up out of the smoke with flame coming off her wrists, the entire shop went silent, and Ryuga stopped crying, and Ryuga stopped drinking, and Ryuga looked at me the way a starving man looks at a menu. Do it again, he said. No, do it again. That, I said, is the deal you can't refuse. Here's what I told him, over what was left of the furniture. My tablets are scattered, 18 of them, 4 home, 14 out there, under the sea and in the dirt and in some rich idiot's display case. I can't feel them past about a kilometer. I need eyes. I need a fleet. I need a network that stretches across an ocean. And every single tablet that comes home, I turn into power. For his people, permanently. 16 more tablets, 16 more abilities, and not the cheap kind. He'd seen the cheap kind. Ryuga, to his enormous credit, did not haggle. Ryuga put a cup in my hand, filled it, filled his own, and said one word. Deal. Now, a piece of housekeeping I should have raised earlier, and which every single person watching has already thought of, so let's get it out of the way before somebody writes it down and hands it to me. Why not just make myself stronger? Believe me, first thing I tried. The tablets don't work that way. They don't stack into a bigger me. They slot back into the shape I'm supposed to be, and a shape doesn't get more shaped. Second question then, why not keep the abilities in-house? Hand them only to Prince and Alara, and never let a stranger touch one. Because I can't find 14 stone tablets with 3 people in a rowboat. That's it. That's the whole answer. I can either be a very powerful hermit missing most of himself forever, or I can be generous and get put back together. It wasn't a hard call, and if it ever becomes one, I'll let you know. Third thing, since we're here, no, I can't just point at the ocean and feel where they are. 1 kilometer, that's the radius. I have the sensory range of a large dog and the ego of a creator deity, and I have made my peace with exactly one of those things. So, a drunk, a scientist with a machine gun in his mouth, 2 orphan survivors of a genocide, and me. That was the founding roster of the Beast's Pirates, and if you'd offered odds on us that afternoon, I would have taken the money and run. The scientist got upgraded first, and I want to stress that this was not a reward. Baron wanted power. Baron made his case for an hour. Baron described himself as indispensable at least 6 times. So I gave him exactly what he asked for, and I picked the shape myself. And that is how a 6-meter man with a brain the size of a planet ended up as an enormous long-necked thing with a fan of green leaves down his back. And this is the important part, a bunch of bananas growing under his chin. Permanently growing bananas. He screamed for a solid minute. Prince laughed so hard he had to sit down. And then Baron picked one and ate it and went completely quiet and looked at the rest of us with an expression I can only describe as religious, because it turns out they were the best thing anyone in that room had ever tasted. That banana is going to build an empire. I want you to remember that I said that. Prince got his the honest way. A devil fruit rolled out of a crate of apples on the dock, actually rolled right past our feet, like the world had decided to tip us, and I took it, and I reshaped it, and I handed it to a 14-year-old boy who ate the thing and grew wings that could hold his weight. Baron, still bitter about the bananas, informed him that the fruit looked worse than something you'd find in a gutter. Prince buried him under 4 house-sized rocks. This is going to be a running problem for Baron. I want you to understand that I did try to stop it, on average, 1 time in 5. And that was the shop. That was the founding. 4 cups of sake in a red bean soup place on a nowhere island, 1 flattened scientist, 1 banana, and a contract. He gets the strongest crew that has ever put to sea. I get put back together. And somewhere on the other side of the world, on top of a red wall, some very comfortable people were about to start finding out what the interest rate was. 16 tablets to go. And Baron already knew where the 3rd one was. The 3rd tablet had been sitting in a treasure chest for years, and the man who owned the chest was dead. Baron laid it out over breakfast. Back when he was still on the payroll, the government had a piece of stone in an evidence room that nobody could scratch, cut, burn, or classify. Then it went missing. Then a very famous pirate started bragging about the lining of a treasure chest that no blade could mark. Ryuga put his cup down hard enough to split the table. Rocks, he said. That's Rock's chest, because Ryuga had been on that ship. Before he was Ryuga of the Beasts, he was a kid on the deck of the most dangerous crew that ever sailed. And when that crew came apart, the treasure came apart with it, into the hands of whoever had been standing closest. One of whom was a treasure hunter named Thomas. Then we find Thomas, I said. Thomas is dead, said Baron. Then we find Thomas's grave, and we dig. That's how the Beast's pirates put to sea for the first time. Not on a galleon, on a fishing boat. A modified fishing boat with a scientist bolted to the deck as our flying mount, because I had just discovered that Baron's new shape could carry weight, and I have never in my life let a resource sit idle. He complained the entire way. He complained about the wind. He complained about the altitude. He complained that being ridden was beneath a man of his intellect. I pointed out that a man of his intellect had said the words, "make me stronger," without specifying a direction, and he went quiet for almost 40 minutes, which is still his personal record. The first real lead cost us a snail. There is a woman in the New World who knows everything. Enormous. Loud. 40 children and counting, and at that moment carrying number 40 and in a very specific mood about it. Ryuga called her because Ryuga knew her from the old ship, and she picked up, and she was delighted to hear from him, and she talked for 11 straight minutes about desserts. Ryuga cut the snail in half with his hand. "She'll call back," he said. She did not call back. But somewhere in minute 9 she had mentioned, between 2 thoughts about cake, that Thomas's old crew were fighting each other over a map. That was all we needed. Meanwhile, the newspapers had gotten hold of us, and I want to read you the headline because it's the first time I ever appeared in print. "Meteorite mate strikes drug laboratory. No survivors." That's it. That's what they printed. A government research site full of cataloged human beings goes up in a lightning grid, and the official position is that the sky did it. And on the next page, quietly, a bounty notice got reissued. Lunarian, live capture preferred. They knew, and they filed it, and they went to lunch. I put the paper down and made 2 decisions. First, we were going to get very rich, because you cannot fight a thing that size with a fishing boat and a grudge. Second, Ryuga was going to become extremely famous on purpose, and I was going to stay a rumor. He was thrilled. He'd been trying to become extremely famous for years without a strategy. I spent that whole first voyage finding out what I could actually do, and I want to be honest about how little that was. I could throw a beam. I had proved that on a corridor. I could not aim it. I could not throw a small one, and I could not throw 2 in a row without sitting down afterward like a man who has carried a wardrobe up some stairs. I had fire, and my fire was hot and dumb. some. I had the blank tablet, which is the one that lets me borrow the shape of a technique without owning the element, and at that point, I could not do anything with it except make my beams slightly larger. That was my arsenal. One dangerous accident, one bonfire, and a nap. So I started teaching instead, because teaching is a thing I could do at full strength on an empty stomach. I want to describe the space, because nobody outside my crew has ever seen it, and it is the single most valuable thing I own. I put my hand on somebody, they fall over. Inside, they are standing in a room, and in that room, time is stretched. An hour out here is most of a week in there, and in there, I can hand them a technique and make them do it until their hands bleed and then keep going. And none of it costs their body anything except sleep. The Lara went first. I gave her the one that stacks strength, and I told her it would take a while. She was out for 7 hours. 7. Prince came and stood over her twice and asked me if she was dying. I told him no. I did not tell him that 7 hours is roughly 2 months in there, and that I had been braced for a fortnight of real time, because I did not want him competing, and he competed anyway. She woke up, ate a whole fish, walked outside, and put her fist through a mast. Ryuga did it in less. I want to be very clear that I hated that. I gave the man 2 techniques on the same afternoon, the stacking one and the barrier, and he came out of the space in under 4 hours with both, ate, and asked what else I had. Nothing. That's it. Then find more of your rocks, he said. I'm bored. And that is the entire economic relationship between me and Ryuga, stated plainly, in the first week. I trained Alara myself after that, on deck, at night, when the men were asleep. Not techniques, angles. She had a 14-year-old's habit of going straight at things, and she had spent 6 months in a cell where going straight at things was the only available form of dignity. And now she was extremely strong and extremely fast, and she still had that habit. So I stood on the rail and threw things at her. Barrels, chain, whatever was to hand. And every time she went straight through the thing instead of around it, I made the next one heavier. And by the 4th night, she was reading the throw and moving before it left my hand, and by the 6th, she was already behind me when it landed. Prince watched all 6 nights from the mast and did not ask to join in, and on the 7th night, he came down and asked. That boy is very bad at asking for things. He asked by standing on the deck holding his own sword and saying nothing for a while. What I gave him was worse than what I gave her, and he liked it more. I taught him to fall. He had wings by then, and he was using them like a bird, beating hard, staying up, fighting the air, which is exhausting and slow and telegraphs everything. So I took him up and made him stop flapping, over and over, until he learned that a heavy thing with wings does not have to fly. It has to fall on purpose and pull out at the bottom. That is why he moves the way he does now. That is where the meteors come from. He is not flying at you. He is dropping and steering, and the flame is his. He broke his arm twice learning it. He never once told his sister. Meanwhile, Baron taught me things I did not want to know. He would come and sit near me while I was working and simply talk, and about 1 sentence in 20 was worth an island. That is the deal with Baron. He is unbearable at every conceivable volume, and he is also the most educated man in this hemisphere, and I have never once been able to afford to walk away from him. He explained the bounty system to me, not how much, how, who sets the number, that the great ones are priced at the top by the government and passed down to the Navy as an instruction rather than an assessment, that the number is a policy statement dressed as arithmetic. He explained what happens to a crew when the food runs out and why it is never the food. And one night he explained, without meaning to, exactly why the government would eventually come for me. He was talking about his old research team, 6 of them, all working on the same question from different sides, the thing inside a body that decides what the body is. One of them wanted to build soldiers out of it. One of them wanted to build himself out of it. One of them is now the smartest man alive and works for the people who own the wall. And Baron said, none of us ever got it to work properly. If anyone ever does, they will not be allowed to keep it. Then he ate a banana off his own chin and went to bed, and I sat on that deck for a long time with 2 children asleep below me and a power in my chest that hands out exactly what 6 government scientists spent their lives failing to build. I have been careful ever since. Not secret, careful. There is a difference, and the difference is that secrets get found, and carefulness gets underestimated. We caught up to Thomas at a place called Kachira Island, and I use the word Thomas loosely because 6,000 pirates had gathered there to serve under a man who had been in the ground for a decade. 6,000. Camped across a whole harbor town, drinking, brawling, waiting for their dead captain to hand out treasure. There were more armed men on that beach than the island had residents. Somewhere in that crowd was a government agent named Gareth who had been embedded for 2 years, patiently writing everything down. And somewhere in that crowd was whatever was pretending to be Thomas. Ryuga's reconnaissance plan was to fly up into a cloud, get comfortable, and drop fire on the target from 3,000 meters to see if it flinched. I approved this plan. It was efficient. And it worked, in the sense that we learned something extremely important, which was that Thomas did not flinch, Thomas did not burn, and Thomas did not have any blood in him at all. We came down through the smoke and there was no body. There was a pile of bones, some cloth, and a mask, a puppet. 6,000 men had been taking orders from a puppet for 10 years, and somewhere under that town was the hand inside it. Ryuga found him in a cellar, a thin, unremarkable, extremely calm man, surrounded by more masks than a theater, who took one look at the horned mountain coming down the stairs, put on a new face, and became Ryuga. Height, voice, everything. Ryuga, faced with a perfect copy of himself, did the only thing Ryuga was ever going to do. He punched it. The man's name was Dubois. He'd been running Thomas's corpse like a hand puppet for a decade, keeping the treasure story alive, keeping the crew loyal, keeping the whole rotten operation warm, for reasons that turned out to be extremely government-shaped. And when the puppet's strings got cut, he emptied the graveyard. That is not a figure of speech. Every dead pirate on that island got up. Not raised exactly, worn, like the masks. 6,000 men found out what they'd been drinking next to, and the harbor turned into something I would rather not describe. I have fought a lot of things since. That night is still the worst hour I have spent on land. Not because it was dangerous, because of the noise. They did not roar. That is the part nobody gets right when they tell this story back to me. 6,000 dead men got up on that beach, and the only sound they made was feet. Thousands of feet on wet sand, all starting at once, and the men who were still alive out there had been drinking with those bodies an hour earlier and knew their names. I put my back to a boat shed and I started killing. I could not aim. I have said that already, and I want you to feel it. I had one beam, and the beam took everything in a straight line for 400 meters, which is magnificent when there is a wall in front of you, and useless when the thing you want is 9 feet away in a crowd with your own people behind it. So I used fire, and fire is slow, and they walked through it. That is the detail I did not expect. A dead man does not stop for burning. He arrives on fire. I put a hand out, and 3 of them came into my flame and kept coming, and one of them got close enough that I could see the tattoo on his shoulder, and I killed him with a hoof to the chest like an animal because I had nothing better. And then the beach went orange. Alara landed in front of me and did not look back and did not say anything, and everything within 10 meters of me stopped existing. Prince came down on my left. Same silence. Same absence of instruction. He did not ask where I wanted him. He simply put himself between me and the largest group of them and started dropping rocks. I want to say something about that, because it took me a long time to work out what I was looking at. Neither of those children was defending me tactically. I did not need it. Between the 2 of them and Ryuga, there was nothing on that beach that could have reached me, and both of them knew that better than I did. They did it because I was the thing they had decided to stand in front of. 6 months earlier, they had been cataloged. They had watched their entire species get reduced to a filing system, and every single person in that building had stood between them and the door. And now there was one thing in this world that had come out of a shell and said their dead people's names out loud, and they had made a decision about it that nobody had asked them to make, and they were 14. I let them. That is the honest answer. I could have moved them. I let them, because I understood, standing there watching a boy drop a rock the size of a cart on a corpse that had been someone's friend, that if I picked them up and carried them out of that fight, I would be taking away the only thing they had chosen for themselves. So I stood behind 2 teenagers and I killed what got past them, and there was not very much. Ryuga went through the middle of it in a straight line, announcing himself. I have to describe how that man fights, because I had only seen him do it to buildings. He does not block. He does not step off line. He walks into the densest available part of a crowd and starts swinging a club the length of a mast, and the reason it works is not the club. It is that a man who genuinely does not care whether he is hit changes the geometry of a fight. Everyone else is solving 2 problems. He is solving 1. He came out the other side of 6,000 bodies without a scratch and complained that they had not been very good. And under the town we found the hand inside the puppet. I did not go into that cellar. Ryuga did that alone and came back up with a thin man over his shoulder and a bag full of masks, and I did the arithmetic on the walk back to the boat. 10 years. That is what I kept getting stuck on. Somebody had kept a corpse walking for 10 years, in public, with a crew, and had done it well enough that 6,000 armed men had rearranged their lives around a dead captain's schedule. That is not a devil fruit. Any idiot can copy a face. That is 10 years of patience. Patience is the thing I look for now. Strength is common. I meet strength every week. I have met perhaps 4 patient people in this entire ocean, and I have hired 2 of them. We got off that island at dawn with the tide going out and the beach still moving in places, and one of our own men asked whether we should burn it. I said no. Not out of squeamishness, because 6,000 pirates from every crew in that hemisphere had families and captains and debts, and every one of those bodies was going to be found by somebody who would go and tell the story of what had happened here, and I wanted that story to travel exactly as it was. I have never had to advertise since. That is 2 things now that I got for free by simply not tidying up. Ryuga went through the crowd like weather, announcing, "Third generation descends," to absolutely nobody while he did it, because that man cannot resist naming things. We took Dubois alive, threw him in the hold of a government patrol boat we stole on the way out, and went to sea. And that night I found Prince on deck with the man's blood still on him. I need to tell you about that interrogation, but not the way you think. Prince had been down there a long time, longer than the information took, and when I found him at the rail, he wasn't triumphant and he wasn't ashamed. His hands were shaking. He said, without turning around, "I liked it." 14 years old. I sat down next next to him, not across from him, next to. And that's when it came out. Not the way people talk about the past, the way people talk about last Tuesday. Because for him, it was last Tuesday. 6 months in that building. The schedule I had been listening to through 4 inches of shell. What the numbers on the intake logs actually meant. Then his sister came up on deck, sat down on his other side, and I learned that she was 14 too. I had assumed a lot about those two. That they were older. That the coldness was armor built over years. No, they were both 14. And there had been a third one, younger, who did not survive the escape, and neither of them said his name out loud that night, and both of them were thinking it. I have been a lot of things across 2 lives. I have never been angrier than I was sitting between those 2 children on that deck. So here is the debt, stated once, plainly, so nobody has to wonder later. There is a wall on the other side of this world with a very comfortable city on top of it, and the people in that city sold a species for parts, and then sold the parts. I am going to take that city apart. Not tonight, not this year. I do not make promises I cannot fund. But every tablet that comes home makes me heavier, and I intend to be extremely heavy when I arrive. Dubois talked in the end. They always do. The only variable is how long Prince enjoys himself first. The dead Thomas had been a decoy from the start, run at the request of a government intelligence man named Spandine, whose entire career appears to be a sequence of increasingly loud mistakes. The real Thomas's treasure was real, and Dubois had a life card sewn into the lining of his hat, a scrap of living paper that points at a person until that person stops existing. I had him properly killed, not thrown overboard, properly, because a man who can wear other people's faces is exactly the sort of person who turns up alive in 3 years wearing yours, and I have never once regretted being thorough. We should have burned the hat. Remember the hat. The next tablet was in the calm belt, which is where the ocean stops behaving and the things living in it stop being fish. No wind, no current, flat water, and no reason for a ship to be there, which is exactly why nobody had ever looked. My range woke up about a kilometer out, and I turned in a slow circle on the deck like a man patting his pockets for keys, and then I pointed straight down. It's under us. How far under? Said Baron. It's inside something. The something surfaced. I don't have a good number for you. Bigger than the island we had just left. An anglerfish the size of a district, with a lure hanging over its face that had been mistaken for a lighthouse by at least 1 previous crew, and somewhere inside a stomach that had been eating shipping for 2 centuries was a piece of me. Ryuga looked at it for a long moment with absolute delight. Then he pulled a spear off his back that a giant had made for a giant, and he threw it. The dread plate came home an hour later covered in things I would rather not itemize. Dark, the one that lets you reach into the place where fear lives and switch the lights off. 4 in me, 14 to go, and my entire crew stood on a deck in the middle of a dead sea watching a mountain of dead fish sink, absolutely certain now that this was going to work. That was when the girl arrived with the knife. She came over the rail while Ryuga was asleep, 10 years old by the look of her, in clothes that had been expensive about a century ago, with a lizard the size of a dog on her shoulder and a dagger in her fist. She walked past 4 grown pirates on watch, walked right past them, and I will explain that in a moment, climbed onto the chest of the most dangerous man in that hemisphere, put the point against his throat, and demanded the ship. The dagger snapped, not bent, snapped, on his skin without waking him. She stared at the handle. Then she looked at me, and to her enormous credit, she did not run. Ryuga opened one eye. Then he laughed so hard he woke the entire vessel, sat up with a 10-year-old still standing on his chest, and said the sentence that changed several lives. You're my apprentice now. Her name was Irina. She was 100 and some years old. I'll say it again because the crew needed a minute too. Irina was over 100. She had spent the last century inside the stomach of a sea monster with her father, living off whatever the thing swallowed, and the reason she still looked 10 was a ring on her finger made of pure gold. Not the metal, the real thing, the extinct thing, which had been quietly refusing to let her age since before anyone else on that ship was born. Her father washed up 2 days later, in a dinosaur suit. I want to be fair to Gaston, because I have come to respect the man enormously, and also because you need to picture him correctly. 200 years old, alchemist, sole surviving citizen of an island called Arkami that got erased off every chart in the world, which is a thing that tends to happen to islands that know how to make pure gold. He had survived a century inside a sea monster's gut by wearing a homemade dinosaur costume and living in a dinosaur nest, because the dinosaurs in there had never developed a strong sense of who was and was not a dinosaur. That is the man. That is our future finance minister. He walked up the beach in a rotting rubber tail and asked politely whether anyone had seen his daughter. Then he saw the ring, and then he saw who was wearing the ring, and then there was a fight about it, and then Gaston came down with a fever that kills 2 grown men out of 3 on the open sea. The cure took me about 9 seconds. The problem was that it was an injection, and Irina, a 100-year-old woman who had killed a man that same week, took one look at the needle, went white, and had to be physically held down by 2 adult pirates while her elderly father got better. Everyone on that ship agreed never to mention it. Everyone on that ship mentioned it constantly. While all this was going on, our lifeguard was doing its job for somebody else. Gareth, our government friend from the beach, had been on the real Thomas's trail for 2 years, and he was better at it than we were, and he was ahead of us, so we followed him. Which brings me to a kingdom shaped like a donut and the worst low tide in recorded history. The kingdom of Natho is a ring of land around a lake, and once every few decades that lake goes out. All of it. The water simply leaves and does not come back for a while, and what it leaves behind is a lakebed that has been swallowing ships and secrets for 4 centuries. We arrived on the day the water left, so did everybody else. Iron Fist, who had also been on Rox's ship and had also been at the treasure. Kenji, same story. 2 old monsters and their fleets converging on the same mudflat, both absolutely certain that the third man from their old partnership had buried something down there, and a government infiltration team sitting on the ridge waiting for all 3 of us to kill each other. I want to walk you through that day properly because it is the day I stopped being a passenger. We came in at first light and the lake was already going. It does not drain like a bath. I had expected a bath. What it does is walk out. The whole waterline moves away from you at about the speed of an old man, all the way round the ring at once, and the noise is enormous and completely wrong. A sucking hiss for hours, and behind it the mud comes up steaming in the cold. And in the mud were ships, hundreds of them. 4 centuries of wrecks lying on their sides in the silt with their masts still up, and men from the kingdom walking out among them with sacks before the water had even finished leaving, because this is the only harvest that island gets, and it comes twice in a lifetime. Then the first fleet came over the ridge, Iron Fist. I had heard the name from Ryuga, and I had not understood it until I watched the man come down onto that lakebed with 400 men behind him, and every one of them in plate. Actual armor on pirates in a swamp. That is his whole philosophy. He had been on the same ship as Ryuga, and he had come to the conclusion that the answer to a dangerous world is to be extremely difficult to open. Kenji arrived from the other side about 20 minutes later with more men and no armor at all. And then a third group came out of the tree line behind us, moving well in matched coats, and did not go down onto the mud at all. They took the ridge and sat. Ryuga saw them and grinned and said, "Government." I asked how he knew. Nobody else waits. That is the best strategic lesson I have ever received in a single sentence. Everyone on that lakebed wanted the treasure. Only one group wanted the survivors. So there were 4 of us in that bowl. 2 old monsters, 1 government team, and us, and none of us could move first because the moment anybody swung, the other 3 would take the ridge behind them. We stood in the mud for 2 hours. I have been in real battles since, and I have never been as tense as I was during those 2 hours of nothing. 400 men in armor standing in silt, sinking slightly, in total silence, watching 400 men in silk who were also sinking. Somebody's horse screamed, everybody's hands moved, and nobody drew. Baron, who was standing next to me pretending to be a mountain, whispered, "This is going to be extremely stupid." He was correct. What broke it was the skull. The lakebed had a skull in it, an actual skull, 100 meters across, sitting in the silt since before there was a kingdom, and the treasure was inside it, and Thomas was inside the treasure, and Thomas was not dead. He had never been dead. The door fruit is one of those powers that sounds stupid right up until it's pointed at you. He could put a door on any surface, wall, floor, open air, and he could put a door on himself, and behind that door was a room only he could reach. That is where the treasure had gone. That is where he had gone. 10 years of the world hunting a dead man, and the man had been carrying his entire fortune around inside his own body, while a puppeteer wore his corpse in public to keep the search pointed the wrong way. Thomas opened a door in the ground and dropped 3 pirate fleets into the treasure cavern at once. It was the most impressive thing I saw that year, and it lasted about 90 seconds, because Thomas had one flaw, and I found it immediately. He was greedy. Not the ordinary kind, the clinical kind. This was a man who had spent a decade alone in a room with his money. So I did something very small to him. I taunted him. That's all. One push on exactly the right nerve, and Thomas came apart. He stopped fighting us and started fighting his own crew, over coins, in the dark, at the bottom of a lake, and his own men put him down. I stood there and watched a legend get killed by his own people over money he could not spend. Then I opened the room inside his body and took the splash plate out of it, and the water came back in. 5 tablets, and suddenly I could feel the entire ocean. I need to slow down and tell you what that was like, because everything I am comes from these moments, and this was the first one that changed the shape of me instead of just adding to it. The other 3 had arrived like keys going into locks, small clicks, a thing I could do that I could not do before. This one arrived like a room turning the lights on. I was standing in a collapsing cave under a lake bed with a dead man's blood on my front, and the water came back in over my feet, and I felt it. Not the water in the cave, the water, the lake and the sea beyond the ring, and the currents under the sea, out past the horizon, in every direction, all at once, like a man who has been deaf his whole life, sitting down in a room full of people talking. I went down on my knees in 6 inches of rising water, and Alara thought I had been hit. I had not been hit. I was busy. I was finding out that from that second forward, there was no such thing as a ship escaping me on open water, and no such thing as a storm happening to me, and that I was never going to drown, and that if I ever want to, I can simply ask a sea to leave. Then a rock the size of a cart came down about 4 feet from my head, and I got up and went back to work because Iron Fist was still alive and extremely upset. That fight is the reason I stopped underestimating old men. He was in his 50s. He had spent his career being the toughest thing in every room, and he had the armor to back it. And when he came at me through a cave-in, he was not swinging wildly. He was cutting off my exits, one at a time, hurting me at a wall, and he was doing it while a ceiling fell on him. I put him to sleep. That is what the Dark Tablet does. It is not a knockout. It reaches past the body entirely and finds the part of a man that decides to be awake, and it turns that part off, and he goes down mid-swing with his eyes open. Kenji I got on the second try, because Kenji saw what happened to his rival and started moving erratically, which does not help as much as people think. Then Ryuga did the thing that ended the day. He had been stacking himself the entire fight. That is what I taught him, and that is what he had been doing quietly for 11 minutes while everyone else was busy. Hit, stack, each one making the next heavier, until the numbers stopped being sensible. 6 times over, he hit the roof. Not a wall, the roof. He dropped the entire cavern on 3 fleets and walked out through it carrying a chest. Baron got hit by our own lightning on the way out and had to be carried by 4 men and complained about it for a week, and I have to say that in his defense it genuinely was our lightning. We surfaced into daylight with the treasure of the Rocks pirates in a net behind us and the entire kingdom of Nathos standing on the shore watching, and I want to be honest about what that money meant because everything after this is built on it. Roads, wages, hospitals, an actual economy. It is very easy to be principled about how you run an island when a dead lunatic has financed you. I would like to tell you we celebrated. What actually happened is that Victoria came over the rail with her stomach opened up, Irina's lizard, half dead, dragging herself across the boards, and the message she got out before she went down was 4 words long. Irina was gone, Gaston was dying, Baron and Alara took the hotel. Between the two of them, the old man was stable inside 20 minutes, and Baron has never let anybody forget it, and on this one occasion, he has earned it. I took the girl. Gareth had her in a house at the edge of town, and he was doing it properly. Not shouting, not hitting. He had her tied to a chair, and he was asking her, very patiently, about the writing on her dress. Because that was the mistake. Alchemy script. A dead island's alphabet, embroidered on the clothes of a little girl, in a world where the government erases islands that know how to make pure gold. He had recognized it in a crowd, and he had gone and gotten her, and he was going to take her home in a box and get a promotion. Irina bit his ear off. I need you to understand the physics here. Gareth had the ability to turn parts of himself into iron. He had done exactly that, because a child was struggling and he wanted to make a point about how pointless it was. So Irina, tied to a chair, 100 years old, arms pinned, leaned in and bit through an iron ear. Ryuga pulled the roof off the building about 4 seconds later. And I want to tell you that we saved her. We didn't. By the time the roof came off, Irina had gotten one arm loose, and she had found a table leg, and Gareth had made a professional's error, which was to turn his back on a small girl in order to face the enormous man in the sky. That was her first. 10 years old to look at, over 100 to live it, and she stood there afterward with her arms shaking and 100 years of never having done that, and Ryuga said, "Good," and walked off to break something else, because Ryuga's emotional range is a cathedral with 1 room in it. I stayed. Somebody had to. We were up a ship after that. Well, up a barge. A proper steam barge bought with dead men's money, and we needed a flag on it. Nobody on that crew could draw. I want that in the record. A future emperor of the sea, a scientist with a doctorate, a boy who could level a harbor, and a girl who could catch cannonballs in the air. And when we put a brush in front of them, what came back looked like a potato with teeth. Prince's version had the horns coming out of the chin. Baron's had a shadow. Ryuga's, in his own words, was fine, and it was not fine. Alara eventually did it. The skull with the horns, exactly the way you know it. She still won't say where she learned. 2 upgrades went out that week. Victoria got a new shape and stopped being a lizard the size of a dog. Long, blue, hands that could shoot water hard enough to core a plank at 400 meters, and the eyes of a professional. She is the best scout I have ever had, and she has never once said an unnecessary word. And Irina ate a fruit that turned her into a fox, which does not sound impressive until I tell you what the fox does. Illusion, not tricks, not smoke. Reality, edited at the sensory level for everyone inside a radius. If Irina wants you to see an empty alley, you see an empty alley. If Irina wants you to see your friend as an enemy, you will fight your friend, hard, and you will mean it. The stronger you are, the shorter it holds. And against a real master of observation, it barely works at all. But there are not many real masters, and there are a great many pirates. Remember the 4 men on watch who let a 10-year-old walk past them with a knife? That was before she had any of this. That was raw. Which brings me back to the hat. Spandine, the loud, incompetent government man, had our life card. He had confiscated Dubois' hat as evidence, and then he set his own office on fire, and then he lost the card in the fire, and then he needed somebody to blame. So he wrote a report. In that report, Dubois, a dead man in a weighted sack at the bottom of the sea, became the mastermind behind everything. The Thomas operation, the stolen stone, all of it. And because the report said so, an entire government department began hunting the ghost of a man I had personally executed, and they widened the search, and they started asking questions about an island called Archemy and the substance it used to make. I read that report and I did not laugh. I did the arithmetic instead. They were going to keep hunting Dubois no matter what I did, so Dubois was going to stay alive forever. And every single thing we did not want traced back to us from that day on was going to be done by a dead man's face. Irina has been Dubois on and off for years now.
She is very good at him.
Around this time, Ryuga got arrested, and I want to be careful how I tell this because it is genuinely one of the funniest things that has ever happened, and it is also the thing that made me realize the man is going to die one day for absolutely no reason. He went out drinking, alone. He flew drunk at night in the general direction of nothing, and he came down inside a naval base, not near it, inside it. He landed in the courtyard of a fortified marine installation at 3 in the morning with no plan, no crew, and no memory of the flight, and he danced. They arrested him. Of course they arrested him. It took most of a garrison and a lot of chain, and by the time Irina and Victoria walked in there the next day, through the front gate, invisible, because that is now a thing we can simply do, he was in a cell being magnificently unbothered. She broke him out in about 4 minutes. And on the way out, Ryuga stopped, in the corridor, and said no, he would not level the base. I asked him about it afterward because I genuinely could not model it. He said, they didn't cheat, they caught me fair. That is the man. That is exactly the man. All of him, in 6 words. He will fly drunk into a fortress and he will not burn it down on the way out because they got him honestly. I have built an entire foreign policy on that sentence and it has never once failed me. The prophecy came out that night. He'd had a lot to drink and he was in a mood, and he told me the thing his old kingdom told him when he was a boy, that he would die in battle. Not might, would. It was a fixed point as far as he was concerned, and it explained an enormous amount. The flying at prison ships, the getting arrested for sport, the total absence of anything resembling self-preservation. He wasn't reckless. He was waiting. I took his liquor away. He got it back within a day, obviously, but I want it noted that I tried, and I want it noted what I said to him, which was that in my experience, prophecies are just people trying to charge you rent on your own future. He laughed at that. Then he said, then let's go to the new world. There are 2 ways into the second half of the world. Under it, through the Fish People's City, which is slow and expensive and requires a coating on your hull. Or over the wall, which nobody does because the wall is 10,000 meters of vertical rock with a city on top, and the people in that city do not like company. We went over. Baron carried the cargo, Ryuga carried Baron, and I want you to know that the whole way up, 600 meters above a red cliff face at night, with a government city glittering just out of sight over the lip, Prince said absolutely nothing and stared at the top the entire time. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, but I noted the route. The other side of that wall is a different ocean. It rains upward. It snows on one side of a ship and burns on the other. The first storm we hit was the kind that ends cruise, and I stood on the bow and put my hand out and turned it off, and 100 pirates behind me went completely silent. That was the first time any of them saw what I actually was. Up until then, I was the strange horse who gave out presents. Ryuga, who had been watching the sky, said out of nowhere, when I have a kid, I want one of those. I told him he was drunk. He was. It happened anyway, and it happened sooner than either of us expected, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We took our first island in a single afternoon. Winter Island had been Thomas's, which meant it was up for grabs, and every small-time crew in 300 miles had come to grab it. There were 11 of them. They had formed an alliance. They had a treaty and a shared flag and a plan. Ryuga went in alone, not as a strategy. He was in a bad mood and he was sober, and a sober Ryuga in a bad mood is genuinely a worse event than a drunk one. And the alliance of 11 pirate crews lasted somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. I did not time it. The harbor changed shape. Then the island's coastal gun opened up on our ship, which was a reasonable thing for them to do, and Alara flew down and kicked it into slag. They surrendered. And this is the part that mattered, though nobody standing there knew it yet. There was a craftsman on that island named Duncan who came out to die in front of his village chief, the way brave men do when they have run out of options. Ryuga was going to oblige him. I stopped it. Not out of mercy, I want to be accurate, but because I had watched the harbor guns, and whoever had maintained those guns knew their work, and you do not put a skilled man in the ground when you are about to need an arms industry. He lived. He built the first factory. He is a very rich old man now, and he still gets nervous around Alara. I took the surrender myself, and I want to tell you what I actually did with it, because I got it wrong twice before I got it right. I walked up that harbor road with the village chief, and I asked him one question. I asked him how many times the island had changed hands in his lifetime. He said 4. I asked him what happened each time. He told me. The first flag taxed them. The second flag taxed them and took the young men. The third flag took everything and left. The fourth flag was Thomas, and Thomas did not take anything at all, because Thomas did not care about this island. And so for 11 years, nobody repaired anything and nobody was paid and the harbor silted up. I asked him which of the four had been the best. He would not answer me. He stood there with his hat in his hands and would not answer me, and I realized he was doing arithmetic on which answer would get his village burned. That is when I understood my actual problem. I did not have a hostile population. I had a population that had learned, correctly, over 4 decades, that the only safe move is to tell the man with the sword whatever he wants to hear. So my first idea was to be generous. I told him there would be no tax for a year. He thanked me. He went away, and nothing happened. No farming, no repairs, no fishing beyond subsistence, because a man who thinks he is being fattened does not build a barn. My second idea was to be clear. I had Gaston post the rules, what we take, when we take it, what we do not touch. That helped slightly. It did not fix it, because a posted rule is a piece of paper, and they had seen paper before. My third idea worked, and it was not mine. Gaston came to me with a document, and I looked at it and told him it was insane. He wanted to give the island a share of what we stole, not wages. Wages I already understood, a cut of the plunder. His argument was that these people were going to be supplying every war we fought, food, powder, rope, timber, all of it, and that a supplier with no stake resents the war, and a supplier with a stake wants us to win. I said it was absurd. He said, you are thinking about it as generosity. Think about it as buying a partner. So we did it, and the first time a battle went well, I paid out to a village, and I watched something change in a way I have never been able to unsee. They started asking about the next one, not fearfully, commercially. An old woman in that harbor asked one of my officers whether we were going out again this season, because she wanted to know whether to put in more nets. I have taken a lot of islands since, and I have never once had to do it that slowly again, because after that first year, I had a reference. I could arrive somewhere new and say, go and ask Winter Island what we are like, and they would, and the answer came back the way I needed it to. The other thing I did that year is that I started paying for the dead. That was mine, and I will take the credit. A man on my flag who dies leaves a family that keeps eating, and a man who is maimed gets a job that is not begging. Half the internal security force in every territory I hold is made of pirates who cannot fight anymore. Baron told me it was expensive. I told him it was the cheapest insurance I had ever bought. He did not agree with me until about 3 years later, when a rival crew came apart in the middle of a war because their wounded had nothing left to lose, and Baron came and found me and did not say anything and then went away again. Then I gave Gaston the island, not the throne, the paperwork. A 200-year-old alchemist in a dinosaur suit became the administrator of a conquered territory, and the first thing he did was hand me a document, and the document was a wage structure. Baron laughed at him, loudly. His position, which he explained at length, was that the people of a conquered island are a resource, and that you press a resource until it stops producing, and then you get another one. I have thought about how to say this next part for a long time, so let me just say it. Every crew that eats itself from the bottom. Everyone. The captain is never the problem. The problem is 400 men who were told they were consumables and then, one day, at exactly the wrong moment, decided to believe it. I have watched it happen from the outside, and I intend never to watch it happen from the inside. So no, enemies, prisoners, anyone who comes at us, do whatever you like. But our people get paid, and the island gets a cut, and when a man dies on our flag, his family keeps eating. Gaston wrote it all down. Wages, rules, a justice system of sorts. Captured pirates went to the mines instead of into a hole in the ground, and the mines paid, badly, and men worked their way out of them. And within a year, the residents of Winter Island, people who had been farmed by 4 different flags in living memory, were volunteering to join us. Meanwhile, Gaston built me a radar. He and Baron spent months on it. Pure gold in the mechanism, because pure gold is the only thing in this world that reacts to my tablets at all, and pure gold is functionally extinct, and Gaston's people were killed for knowing how to make it. The finished device had a detection range of 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer. Months of work, most of the world's remaining supply of an extinct metal, and I ended up with a bracelet that can find a piece of me if I am already close enough to trip over it. Gaston apologized. I told him the truth, which is that a bad map is still infinitely better than no map, and then we made a second, smaller, worse one out of the offcuts, so that Ryuga and Alera could both sweep while I swept. 3 lines instead of 1. That is how you do it when the tool is bad. You buy more hands, which is roughly when a man called the World Destroyer showed up in our waters. Finley Knox had a bounty of 200 million, and that number was a lie. Not too high, too low. This was a man whose personal highlight reel included exchanges with Whitebeard, with Golden Lion, with Silas, and with a Marine Admiral, and he was priced like a mid-tier nuisance. I asked why, and the answer taught me more about how this world actually runs than anything else that year. He was not priced by threat, he was priced by policy. The government does not mind pirates. Pirates are useful. Pirates keep the seas frightening, which keeps small countries paying protection to a bigger government, which is the entire business model. What the government minds is a pirate with a philosophy, and Knox had one. He wanted to break the world open, not rule it, break it. He attacked navies and pirates and civilians with equal enthusiasm and no discernible pattern, and men like that make ordinary people ask ordinary questions about who exactly is in charge. So they held his number down, kept him cheap, made him look catchable, so that ambitious idiots would keep throwing themselves at him and wearing him out. That is the sort of thing I like to know about the people I am about to work for. His ability doubled things. Anything. Size, speed, force, applied to a rock or a cannonball or himself, up to 100 times over, and 100 times Knox wrapped in hardening was fast enough that Ryuga did not have a speed advantage. They fought for most of a day, and I spent most of that day being useless. I want to say that out loud, because I've told you a lot of things I did, and I have not yet told you about a day when I could not do any of them. I could not join the duel. If I had gone at Knox, I would have had to open with my beam, and my beam does not care who else is standing in the line. And Ryuga was in the line for 11 hours. I could not shell their ship because we were out of shells. I could not take the sea out from under them because I did not have the water tablet yet. That came later, in a lake bed, and I have thought many times since about how differently this day would have gone if the order of my life had been 3 weeks different. So I stood on my own deck and I watched my people work. I watched Alara go up alone and stay up, hours. She did not come down once. Every shell that came at our hull got caught or kicked or burned out of the air, and I stood underneath her counting, and at some point, past 200, I stopped counting because it was making me feel things I did not have time for. I watched Prince choose the sails. I want you to appreciate that decision, because he made it at 15, in the middle of a boarding action, with a deck full of men to kill. He went past all of them for the canvas, because a ship with no sails cannot keep its distance, and their entire plan was distance. He got hit on the way in by their shipwright, a man who turns things into stacked cubes and rebuilds them, and I saw the hit land from 300 meters, and I did not do anything, because I could not have reached him, and because he did not need me to. He set the sails on fire, and their speed died, and my chest hurt. And then I watched a rock hit Alara. Knox threw it. From the middle of his duel, one rock doubled 30 times over at a girl who was busy holding an entire broadside off my hull, and it caught her wing and dropped her most of the way to the water. I moved. I got about 4 steps before Baron put an arm in front of me, which is the single bravest thing that man has ever done, and said, "Lord Ether, if you go, she has to explain it to herself afterward." I stopped. I have never told her that. I am telling you. She came back up. She always comes back up. She came up out of that fall furious and wet, and she hates being wet more than she hates almost anything, and the fish giant who came for her next found that out immediately. But I stood on that deck for 11 hours with a hole in the middle of me where the thing I could do was supposed to be. And I want it in the record that this is the day I stopped thinking of the tablets as pieces of a collection. They are not a collection. Every one of them out there is a thing I cannot do while somebody I own is being hit. While they fought, everything else happened. Alara held the entire enemy broadside by herself. I want to describe this properly because I have never seen anyone else do it. Their ship had the firepower advantage. We had come in light and burned through our shells, and their answer was to stand off and shell us into splinters. So Alara went up, alone, and stayed up, and every shell that came at our hull got caught, kicked, or burned out of the air for hours, while the crew rowed us closer. Prince boarded them and went for the sails. That is the part I want the strategist to notice, not the kill count. He had a whole deck of men to butcher, and he went past all of them for the canvas, because a ship with no sails cannot keep its distance, and the entire enemy plan was distance. He got hit on the way in by a man made of cubes, Brennan, their shipwright, who could turn any object into a stack of blocks and rebuild it, and shrugged it off, and set the sails on fire, and their speed died. Then the fish giant came up out of the sea for Alara, Caspian, half fishman, half giant, blind, and better at fighting blind than most men are with both eyes. He fought her from underwater, where her fire was worth a third of its value, hitting and vanishing, and he could not beat her, and she could not catch him, and that was the point. He wasn't trying to win, he was trying to keep her busy while their guns finished us. Knox threw a rock at her. One rock doubled 30 times, from the middle of his duel with Ryuga, and it clipped her wing and dropped her most of the way to the water, and that is when the fight ended, although it took another hour for everyone to find out. Ryuga had been enjoying himself up until then. He stopped enjoying himself. You have to understand that Ryuga will let you hit him. He likes it. It is genuinely how he says hello. What he will not tolerate, what turns a brawl into an execution, is a man who is fighting him and finds time to reach past him at someone smaller. He put his club through Knox's face hard enough to remove teeth. Knox's counterpunch, 100 times over, hit a wall that was not there and stopped dead, and his own force came back up his arm and swelled his wrist, and he stood in the crater looking at his hand with an expression I have thought about many times since. That was the first time in his life a man had asked him a question he could not double his way out of. I had given Ryuga two things by then. One was a technique that stacks his own strength over and over until the numbers stop making sense. The other was a barrier, just a barrier. It does not attack, it cannot be broken. It costs a great deal to hold, and it fails if you lean on it too often, and there is no living thing in this ocean that can put a mark on it while it is up. Between the two of them, Ryuga is now a man who hits harder every second and cannot be hit at all, and that is why he does not have injuries. That is the whole secret. Everyone says he cannot be hurt. He can be hurt. He simply never permits the exchange he would lose. Nox knew he was finished about 4 moves later, so he broke off, doubled his own speed to 100, and came out of the fight in a straight line. Not to run, to punch Baron out of the sky. Which he did, once, straight down, through the rail of our own ship, into the sea. Nobody was surprised. Everyone was busy. Prince had to detail 4 men to go fishing. Their escape was actually beautiful, and I would like to give credit. Brennan turned the entire hull into cubes and reassembled it as a hull-shaped engine mount, and Nox doubled it 50 times, and their ship left the sea area in a straight white line before anyone could react. It also destroyed their ship permanently, and it only goes in one direction, and it cost them the war. But it was beautiful. We had won. We had our first territory in the New World, and a few hours later, on the far side of the horizon, Finley Knox got shot in the back by his own crew. That is not a metaphor this time. The government had put agents on that ship years earlier, quietly, patiently, and they had spent that whole time being reliable comrades. They waited until he was too broken to stand, and then they opened fire, and they had brought his own men in on it with a promise of pardons. Then, once he was in chains, they executed the men who had helped them. How could the government possibly forgive pirates? One of them said, walking away from it. There will always be naive people. I want you to hold on to that, because in about 4 years, a great many people are going to start explaining to me why the government is the civilized option. We buried our dead on the island where they died. I need to explain why that was strange. Pirates do not have graves. Pirates go over the side, and the ocean handles the paperwork. And the reason is that a crew with no fixed address cannot keep a cemetery. So I made the battlefield into one. Stones with names on them, in rows, on a rock in the middle of nowhere, where a man's friends could go and stand if they wanted to. It cost me nothing. It bought me more loyalty than the wages did. Then Baron brought out the wheel. I would like to state clearly that the wheel was not my idea. I had intended a quiet, dignified system based on merit. What I got was a scientist with a microphone, a fairground spinner the height of a man, and a crowd of drunk pirates screaming. The logic was sound, though. That is the annoying part. If I hand out power by judgment, then every man who doesn't get it believes he was cheated, and I have 400 people quietly building resentments. If I hand it out by dart, nobody has anyone to blame but their own aim. The first winner was a young man called Haruto, and I want to be clear about why he won. He had gone in first, and he had gone into the water first to fish Baron out, and he had not broken a rule in months. That was the qualification, not strength, conduct. His dart hit the line between 2 wedges. Baron, who was having the time of his life, told him to choose. He looked at the word Iijutsu and decided it sounded like a haircut, and picked the other one, which said Machamp. Then he fell asleep for 60 hours. I should explain. When I give someone power, I do not simply pour it in. I take them into a space, and in that space they train, and the time runs differently. Hours out here, weeks in there, and how long it takes is a straight measure of how good they are. Alara learned her first technique in 7. Ryuga, less. Haruto took 60, which is 2 months in there, and he came out at beginner level and ravenous. The crowd was extremely disappointed. 3 days of build-up for a man who woke up and asked for a sandwich. He ate, he stood up, he walked to a boulder half buried in the ground, the sort of rock a team of men would move with a winch, and he hugged it, and 8 men shouted at him to stop embarrassing himself, and Haruto tore it out of the earth and threw it into the sea. I have never had to advertise the wheel again. Not everyone got a wheel. Some people got a different offer. There was a man named Clyde who had gone in with Haruto and had not been lucky. Lost his right arm at the shoulder, lost most of his face to burns, lived. In this world, that means one thing: a support job on shore and a slow slide into poverty, and everyone, including him, knew it. He came to Baron and asked to be rebuilt. Baron had been waiting his entire career for someone to ask that. It took him a day. Rotary cannon where the arm had been, metal in the joints, nerve linkage, and Clyde walked out heavier, uglier, and considerably more dangerous than he had walked in. That is a choice most men will not make. I have never pushed anyone toward it, but the door is open, and it is open because of him. Then the newspapers came, and Alara set a house on fire. Our first bounties had come out. Prince and Alara made the list. Ryuga went to 1.8 billion, which is roughly the entirety of Nox's number added to his own, because that is apparently how the accounting works. And then there was mine. I want to read it to you exactly as printed. Unidentified creature. Beasts, pirates, pet. 5,000 berries. 5,000. Not 500 million. 5,000. That is a number that will not buy dinner. That is a number they give to a talking reindeer as a joke. Some photographer on Nox's ship had gotten a shot of me standing on the bow when we came in with the supply run, and an analyst had looked at that photograph and written the word pet and gone home. I laughed, actually. Genuinely. It is a good outcome. Being underestimated in writing, in a public document, is worth more than a fleet. Alara did not laugh. Alara burned down a house. By the time I got the report, she had already put out a bounty of her own in the underworld on the specific person who had written the word pet and doubled it when Baron arrived, because Baron made the mistake of walking through the door at the wrong moment and got used as a training implement for an hour. Ryuga read it, made a noise, and said nothing, and from that week onward, nothing in Ryuga's territory has ever been priced at 5,000. Not a drink, not a rope, not a sack of rice. He never announced it. He never explained it. He just made the numbers stop existing on his islands. I have never mentioned that I noticed. Now, a word about slaves, because this is where the world stopped being an adventure for me. We needed materials, pure gold ingredients, extinct minerals, the things that do not have a legal market. That means the underworld, and the underworld in the New World does not have a street address. You find a specific island that is on no chart, you say the right words in the right tavern, and a floor opens. Prince took Irina, wearing Dubois' face, because we buy the dangerous things as a dead man and the legal things as ourselves. Under that tavern was a market, minerals, timber, gold, people, cages, long-armed people, fish people, ordinary people, and organs in jars on ice for the customers who only wanted a piece. And around all of it, men in good coats, laughing, doing business, stepping over the sound. Irina stopped walking. She is over 100 years old, and she spent that century inside a fish, and she had never seen this, and it showed on her face. And Prince, 14 years old, who had been inventory himself 18 months earlier, leaned down and said the only useful thing there was to say, "Put your sympathy away. You cannot help them here, and that expression makes you merchandise. If you want the world to go your way, get strong enough to make it." She put it away. Then she bought 13 children. She haggled too, and she was good at it. Beat the man down from 10 million to 13 for the batch by loudly criticizing the condition of his stock, which is a thing I have thought about many times since. And he threw in a treasure map for free because he could not read it, and neither could anybody he knew. Remember the map. Two more things happened in that market, both small, both funny, and one of them I would not understand the size of for another 20 years. The first is that a boy tried to rob her, 8 years old, red nose the size of a fist. He had spotted the money coming out, and he had spent 5 minutes loudly whispering a plan to his friend, a red-haired boy of about the same age, and neither of them had accounted for the fact that Irina is part fox and could hear every word from 30 meters away. She led them into an alley and let them find her. They spent the next several minutes beating each other unconscious. That is all she did. She made each of them look like her and stood back. Two future legends of this ocean, 8 years old, rolling around in the dirt hitting their best friend as hard as they could, while a 100-year-old girl ate an ice cream and watched. She let them go. Their captain apparently laughed for a week. The second thing happened on our own ship, and it was not funny at all. We came into a friendly island, and Irina unlocked the chains and lowered the plank, and told 13 children they were free. Not one of them moved. They stood on that deck and looked at an open gangway and an inhabited island, and they did not move, because they had been offered freedom before by men who wanted to see who would take it. Prince said, "Look at the old marks. Someone has already made them this offer. Once." He knew because he had been made it. So she brought them home instead and gave them jobs, and every one of those 13 is on our payroll to this day. And the day after that, Irina started training like a person with something to prove. That is the exact moment she stopped being an apprentice, in my opinion. She has never agreed with me about that. Anyway, she had a treasure map, she had a hunch, and she had correctly worked out that Ryuga would say yes, but then leave her alone in a jungle to build character, that Alara would call it a waste of time and assign her more training, and that I was the only person on the ship who could be talked into a treasure hunt. She was completely right, and I want that on the record as well. Before we could leave, Baron started a war over bananas. I need to build this properly, because on the surface, it is the stupidest incident in our history, and underneath it is the single most profitable thing that has ever happened to us. Baron's bananas, the ones growing out of his chin, the ones he screamed about, turned out to have seeds. Degenerated seeds, mostly useless, but not entirely. He spent months cultivating them. He got a first generation. They were not as good as the originals, and they were still better than anything else in this ocean, and they kept for weeks instead of days, and he planted a whole island of them and guarded it like a man guarding a child. Then somebody stole 4 crates. Here is what he did not know. That woman with the 40 children, the one who talked to Ryuga for 11 minutes about cake, periodically gets a condition. It is not a metaphor. She develops a craving, and if she does not get exactly the food she is craving, she destroys whatever is in front of her until she does. Islands have been erased over pastry. Her craving that season was banana mousse. Her people had scoured half the world for bananas, and every one of them tasted like sawdust to her, until somebody happened to steal 4 crates of Baron's. Her eldest son came back to annex the island. Luciano, 19, long tongue, candy powers, a voice like a man reading a menu. He walked onto that beach with a landing party, informed the workers that they now had a new flag and an annual tribute in bananas, and got about 4 sentences in before Baron came out of the sky. I would love to tell you that this was a clash of titans. It was a solar beam versus a candy wall, and the candy lost, because candy is hard and candy melts, and Baron had been standing with the sun behind him for a full minute charging while Luciano monologued. It went badly for the eldest son of the strongest woman on the sea. He got up, he came back. He was, credit where it is due, extremely brave about a fight he was never going to win. And then Baron won, and celebrated by loudly explaining to his subordinates that Alara was overrated and only beat him because Ryuga went easy on her. Alara was standing behind him. She had come to resupply on the way to my treasure hunt, heard fighting, and arrived somewhere around the word overrated. She lit his cigar for him. He took a drag. He got about half a second of satisfaction before he recognized the hand. She grabbed his ankle, took his entire body weight on one leg, and bowled him. That is the correct verb. Baron weighs as much as a house. She used him as a projectile, launched him across the beach into the retreating enemy formation, and then went in ahead of him, kicking stragglers into his path so they would be there when he arrived. She named the move. Out loud. During. Somebody in the crew asked, genuinely, whether a thing kicked with a foot could be called bowling, or whether it should technically be a goal, and nobody answered him, because the eldest son of the most dangerous woman in this hemisphere was at that moment being buried up to his neck in wet sand at the tide line with only his head showing. Then Alara put his phone down in front of his face and left. She did not answer it for him. She did not untie him. She placed a live communication snail on the sand in front of a man buried up to his chin, told him to work it out with his tongue, and walked away. And somewhere in a castle made of cake, his mother was calling to ask where her moose was. Ryuga flew to Cake Island the next morning. He went on purpose, and he went for a specific reason, and it is one of the smartest things I have watched him do. If she came to us, the fight would happen on our island, and our island would stop existing. If he went to her, the fight would happen at her house. So he arrived over her capital as a blue dragon at dawn, and made her come outside. They had not seen each other in 8 years. They had been children together on the deck of the worst ship in history. She looked up at a dragon the size of a district and said, "My little brother isn't cute anymore." And then they sat down and drank. And I want to tell you what they negotiated, because it is not what anybody expected. Not territory, not weapons, bananas. She wanted the fruit, guaranteed supply, priority, forever. And Ryuga did not want money for it, because we had Thomas's treasure, and money had stopped being interesting. He wanted her address book, because the strongest woman on this sea has the deepest underworld network in the world. She has to. You cannot collect rare races and rare ingredients on that scale without knowing everyone who moves rare things. And I needed eyes. I needed thousands of them, in every port, in every black market, looking for a shape. Half the crop, forever, for the ability to ask the entire criminal economy a question. She took it. She thought she was fleecing him. There is a real chance she was. That fruit is going to be worth an absurd amount of money. But I was not buying fruit prices. I was buying a search radius, and my search radius went from 1 kilometer to the entire world in a single afternoon. Her new husband walked in during the toast and objected to how closely she was sitting. He was, at that point, a man with about 4 months left on his contract. He used up all 4 in one sentence, and she slapped him out of the story, and that is the last anyone ever heard of him. Ryuga came home with a stone tablet in a crate. She had one. She had had one for years and thought it was an ugly paperweight. 6. Then we went treasure hunting, and the treasure hunt turned into the worst thing I had seen in this world so far. The map was written in Archemy pictographs, which is why the slaver gave it away for free and why Arena could read 3/4 of it. Gaston filled in the rest from the mainland by snail. The last line came out as this: "The wings of midnight pierce the clouds, the moonlight guides the final direction." We reached the marked sea area, and there was nothing there. Flat water, thick cloud, no island, no reef. So we anchored, because that line clearly said to wait for midnight, and we waited. At midnight, the clouds split. Something flew through them, high up, too fast to see properly, and where it cut the cloud, the moon came through in a single hard line across the water, pointing somewhere. Irina said, "Nature is amazing," which is the sort of thing you say 10 seconds before something falls on your ship. It came down on the foredeck, and it was dying. 9 meters of it. Green back, white belly, feathered like a bird and built like a lizard, wings and forelimbs fused, huge bird's feet, and a black harpoon the thickness of my leg through one wing, with a chain and a weight on the end of it. Somebody had built that harpoon specifically to bring down something that flies, a millennium dragon. They live 1,000 years, they gather once a millennium on an island in the East Blue that surfaces for one day, and they are supposedly extinct in most of the world. The reason they are supposedly extinct is that some people believe their bones cure death. They do not. I want to say that flatly. The government has tested it. Baron personally worked on the research, and the answer was no, and the answer has been no for a century. And it does not matter at all, because the market for immortality does not run on evidence. It runs on rich men who are afraid. Our ship's doctor had to be talked into operating. He had every right to refuse. The barbs on that harpoon were the size of hands. The shaft could not be cut by anything on board. Victoria's tail blade finally did it, and pulling it was going to open the wound out to daylight. He kept saying, "It will die." Irina anesthetized it with an illusion, not a drug. She reached into a dragon's senses and simply removed the concept of pain from the next 10 minutes, and held that while 2 pirates hauled a barbed shaft out of its chest, and the doctor looked at the wreckage inside and privately gave up. Then I put my hand on it and gave it back its life. Water does that. That is what nobody expects from the water tablet. It is not a weapon, it is a tide, and a tide can carry things back in as easily as it takes them out. Every wound on that deck closed, including the ones on the pirates who had been holding it down and had not mentioned they were bleeding. The ship's doctor stood there holding a needle and said one word: "God." And the dragon lived. And it talked, which was a surprise to everyone except Victoria, who turned out to speak the language and had simply never been asked. The first thing it said was thank you. The second thing it said was that it was only 200 years old and did not know very much, but its father was 600 and would. The third thing it said was that it was hungry. We fed it. And then a cannon shell landed 30 meters off our beam and put water across my back. And Baron, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate loyalty in front of the boss, launched himself into the night sky screaming about the honor of Lord Ether before anyone had even identified the ship. I sent Alara after him, not to help, to keep him from missing. The ship that had fired on us was flying a scalpel and a sphere, the organ trafficking assassination group. That is what they call themselves. They kill people to order, on commission, and the point of the killing is the inventory. Hearts, corneas, kidneys, sold to kings and nobles who need a part and do not want a machine. The reason they assassinate rather than raid is that the merchandise keeps better when it is not shot. They had come for the dragons. Bones for a rich idiot on the red wall. Baron cleared their deck with plant fire and then went below and came straight back up and told Alara she needed to see something and would not say what. Below decks it was clean, disinfected, tidy. There were tanks with things floating in them, and there was a prison, and there was a slaughter room, and none of that is what stopped her. On the wall of the officer's mess, hung up as decoration, were a pair of black wings. Not a bird's, not a costume. Lunarian wings are part of the body. Somebody in that room had taken them off a dead person and hung them up because they thought they went with the furniture, and they had been up there for decades, and they had bought them at auction from a government seller. Baron did not describe what happened next. He has been asked. He will not do it. His exact words afterward were that he had spent a lot of years calling Prince a pervert for enjoying interrogation, and that after that night, he owed Prince an apology. Then Alara burned the wings. That is their funeral rite. It only works with their own fire. Nothing else will do it properly. So she cremated a stranger's remains on a slaver's deck, and then she cremated the deck, and everyone standing on it, and the whole ship went down in one column of flame that we could see from 3 miles off. She came back aboard, walked past me, stopped, and said, "Baron, thank you." I have never seen a man look more frightened. She followed it immediately with a clarification that she still hates researchers, that this changes nothing, and that he may bring it up once at a moment of her choosing when she is about to hit him, and normal service resumed. But she said it. The dragons lived above the clouds. That is what the riddle meant. The line of moonlight did not point at an island. It pointed at a spot on the water with an island 4,000 meters directly overhead, because a dragon hunting skyfish will punch a hole through the cloud sea, and that hole lets the moon through, and the mark on the map was the place where the light lands. Our ship could not fly. You reach a sky island either by climbing a stair of solid cloud or by riding a column of water that fires up out of the ocean like a geyser, and there was no column here, so I made one. I put the water tablet into the sea and pulled, and every man on that deck grabbed something and held on, and 110 tons of ship went up 4,000 meters on a pillar of ocean and came out through the cloud sea into a massacre. They had been hunting for hours. Small boats out from 2 big ships, harpoon launchers on the decks, nets, tranquilizers strong enough for something 20 times a man's weight. 27 dragons in that flock. They had already captured several, and the flock had refused to run because they had chicks up there and because the hunters had made sure to take hostages first. 7 of them died before we arrived. 7 out of 27, which is a quarter of a species fragment in one afternoon, so that a man on a red wall could grind their bones into a drink that does nothing. I came up through that cloud layer on a column of my own seawater, and I saw 7 bodies. Not 7 kills, 7 bodies laid out on the white where the flock had dragged them, because they had been dragging their own dead out of the fighting for hours instead of running. That is what I want you to hold. They could have left. Every one of those animals can fly, and the things hunting them were in boats. They stayed because there were chicks up there, and because the hunters had taken hostages first, and they had been paying for that decision all afternoon. I have made a great many creatures since. I made my first one about 3 weeks after this, and I would be lying if I said this had nothing to do with it. Then I got angry in a way I have not repeated. I did not level that island. I want to be clear about that because I could have, and because a version of me that had not been listening to a schedule through 4 inches of shell might have. There were 20 living dragons up there, and 3 eggs, and a beam does not know the difference. So I did it the slow way, which is the correct way, and I let my crew do most of it. The fight was short. Our cannons outranged theirs by a third. Winter Island's guns, Duncan's guns, and Victoria put water rounds through every harpoon launcher on both decks from a range where they never saw her. A launcher with a hole in the breech is a very expensive stick. There were no prisoners. That was not a decision anyone had to make out loud. Afterward, the leader of the flock came down, 10 meters of him, and thanked me and apologized and told me he had never seen the thing I was looking for, but that his kind gather once 1,000 years, and there are less than 30 years to go, and he would ask everyone there. Then he told me they were moving, that the site was compromised, that they would find somewhere else, and I said, come to my house instead. 20 dragons and 3 eggs, relocated to Winter Island, under our flag. In exchange, I asked 2 things: information at the gathering, and that they let me change how they look. That last part mattered more than it sounds. Everyone in this world knows what a Millennium Dragon is worth. Nobody knows what an Archeops is, because I made it up. Same creature, different skin, and now a hunting party that finds them thinks it has found some large, ugly bird. The old ones did not like it. The young ones thought it was fantastic, and the flock leader agreed, because he had watched a stranger pull the ocean into the sky and had drawn some conclusions about which side to be on. That is how the Beast Pirates got an air force. Ryuga, when we came home with 20 dragons circling above the harbor, actually stopped walking. He looked up. He worked out what he was looking at. And then he laughed for a very long time and said that partnering with me had been the correct decision, which is the closest thing to a compliment I have received from him before or since. 15 adults, 4 riders each, 58 seats in the sky. Ryuga had a fleet. Nobody else in this ocean had a fleet that could arrive from above except one old madman with a floating fortress, and he was busy. I put Irina in charge of it because Victoria is the only translator we have, and Victoria goes where Irina goes. She was delighted for about 6 minutes, until she understood that this meant an entire new syllabus of aerial combat training designed personally by 4 different monsters, and that Baron had contributed a section on falling. The Zap plate came home the same week, out of the crate that Ryuga had traded bananas for. Lightning, that is 6. And the second man to draw the wheel got a wedge with 1 word on it, in blue, and that word was splash. Not lightning, not fire. Splash. He came out of the learning space 3 days later, looking like a man who had opened an inheritance letter and found a coupon. And the crew, who had waited 3 days and started a betting pool, demanded a demonstration. So he walked to the sea, took a step, and jumped on it. On the water. Then off the water, 40 feet, and down again, and off again, and across the entire harbor without getting wet above the ankle. Riverton. Remember the name. That man is going to have the strangest career in the history of this crew, and it starts with the single most useless-sounding prize on the wheel, and I want you to keep score, because his luck is about to become a running joke that stops being funny. Then we finished the flagship, and we went and killed an entire industry. The Beast Prince came off the slipway that spring, the first proper capital ship we ever had, built out of timber Prince had bought under a dead man's name, with guns designed by a man who had come to that island planning to build a cannon big enough to end the world. 650 berths. Firepower to match a Navy line ship. Its maiden voyage carried 200 people, both leaders, both top officers, and a flight of dragons overhead, and it went to the headquarters of the organ trafficking assassination group. Ilera asked to plan an assassination, get in, take the head of the organization, retrieve the second pair of wings that the interrogation had told us about, get out clean. I said no. I want to explain why, because it is the only time I have overruled her on something that was hers. An assassination has one purpose, nobody knows. So if you kill every single witness on the island, the definition still technically holds, and you have also removed an entire supply chain from the world. Ryuga, who had been listening with his eyes shut, opened them and said, so we're going shopping. He did not need a reason. He had not been paid. He came because a member of his crew had been hurt by these people, and because we had a ship that had never fired its guns, and I have stopped trying to make that man's motivations more complicated than they are. Their headquarters was on an unmapped island with a nice office at the top, and the man who ran it wore a suit and chewed gum and required his employees to call him manager. He considered himself a legitimate businessman. He had never been on a wanted poster in his life because his connections to the government were excellent, which is a sentence I would like everyone to sit with for a moment. Below the office was the farm. That is what they called it. Living people, fed a scientific diet, made to exercise daily, kept healthy, held until somebody with money needed a matching part. They were not slaves in the market sense. Slaves get sold. These were containers. There was a client waiting that week, a king in the West Blue with a sickly son who wanted something stronger than human, and there was a girl in the last cage who fit the order. We started shelling the island at dawn. Ryuga could have ended it in one pass and did not, on purpose. He wants soldiers, not passengers, and a man who has only ever been protected is not a soldier. So the guns spoke, and 200 pirates went up that beach on their own, and the assassination group discovered what a great many specialists discover, which is that being frightening in private is not the same as being dangerous in a field. Prince melted the front gate, actually melted it, cast iron running like syrup, and then had to lay a path of stone across his own molten metal so the ordinary men could follow him in, leave no one alive. The manager, meanwhile, was on the phone begging. He called Luciano. He had been trying to lease a flag from that family for months, and they had been haggling over price, and now he needed it immediately, and he got about 8 words in. Do you remember me? He said. I don't remember. Who are you? How did you get this number? And the line went dead. And I want everyone to understand exactly what happened there. That was not cowardice. That was a man doing arithmetic in half a second. No flag had been lent. No obligation existed. And on the other side of the ledger, that same family had just signed a permanent supply contract with us for a fruit their mother was addicted to. The manager had been the seventh most important man in the criminal economy that morning. By lunchtime, he was a hole in a supply chain that 6 other people were already circling. Downstairs, Ilara went through the farm opening cages. She was not there to rescue anyone. I want to be honest about that. Her list had 2 items on it, and neither of them was charity. But she broke the locks anyway, because the locks were in her way, and because she is what she is, and she told them all to hide until the noise stopped. And a wolf followed her. I mean that literally. A white wolf girl, 10 years old, mink tribe, still in the shackles they use for her people. High-temperature rubber, because minks generate lightning out of their own fur, and ordinary irons just charge them up. She had been in that cage refusing food and trying to kill herself because she had worked out what she was for. She had also, in her time there, memorized the smell of every man who mattered. She got loose, and instead of hiding, she ran after the terrifying stranger who had just torn her cage in half. Ilara turned and nearly took her head off, pulled the kick at the last instant. And the girl caught her leg, flipped twice in the air to bleed off the force, landed clean, and asked her a question. Are all the minks from overseas able to make fire? Because she had never seen a devil fruit. She had never left home. Her entire model of the world was that there is Zo, where the minks live, and there is overseas, where there are more minks, and some humans who are basically minks with a hair problem. Ilara, feathers, talons, fire did not register as anything strange, just an unfamiliar breed. Then she rubbed her face against Ilara's face and said, Garuchu. That is how minks say hello, cheek to cheek. Ilara, who has killed men for looking at her wrong, stood absolutely still and allowed it, and afterward could not explain why, and I have never let her forget it. The girl also solved our problem. Prince had gone deep, taken out the leadership, found the second pair of wings and destroyed them properly, and reported that the manager had never been on the island at all. That was the information he had extracted, from several people, consistently. The wolf girl walked up, pointed at a corpse on the floor and said, That one, that's him. I know his smell. Prince had killed that man 10 minutes earlier with a kick to the chest, except the body was already stiff, rigor mortis, cold to the touch, in 10 minutes, which does not happen, and Prince touched him and understood and drove a fist at his head. The corpse rolled. A possum. That was his ability. Not a fighting shape, not a monster, a small gray animal whose entire evolutionary strategy is to be extremely convincing about being dead. He had run the biggest organ trade in the New World for years, and his personal power was playing possum, and it had worked flawlessly on a man who could burn a city, and it was defeated by a 10-year-old's nose. Prince locked him down with 4 slabs of rock, took his head, and burned both halves separately, because Prince has become a thorough person. We put the survivors on the nearest inhabited island and left, not out of kindness, out of publicity. 200 freed people telling the story of who killed the organ traders is worth more than a press release. Everyone got off the ship, except the wolf. She would not go. She attached herself to Ilara's leg like a piece of luggage and refused, and Ilara, who genuinely tried, could not shake her. She tried logic. We are pirates. We are the bad people. But you saved me. Only good people save people. She tried a demonstration. She lined up 4 of our roughest men and told them to look frightening. It is very difficult for a human being to look frightening to a wolf. They tried. Snarls, teeth, the whole performance. The child watched with polite interest and asked why they were making faces. Ilara gave up and offered to take her home instead, and found out that she could not. Her people live on the back of a walking elephant 1,000 meters tall that never stops moving, and the only way to find it is a scrap of living paper, and hers had been taken when she was captured, so she came home with us. Her name is Sakura. She was 7 when she snuck off her island because 2 older boys had told her the world was small and she had decided to prove otherwise, and she was 10 when we got her, and she had spent the gap being merchandise. I looked at her for about a day, then I built her a husband. I would like to phrase that more delicately, and I cannot, so let me at least explain the reasoning. The elephant her people live on walks the whole world. It has done it for 1,000 years. It cannot be found, it cannot be followed, and the 10,000 minks on its back are, individually, worth 3 human soldiers each in a fight, and they have never once been used for anything. And their king is chosen, not born. Anyone with the strength and the people's blessing can take the throne. And a little girl on my deck had already told everyone within earshot that she was going to be the first Duchess of Zoo. So I laid out 5 tablets on the night deck, put lightning in the middle, and did the thing I had not yet done in this world. Not modification, creation. Making something out of nothing is enormously expensive. Modification takes minutes. This took hours, and it took a piece of me that I could feel leaving. A point of light grew like an embryo. Then it stood up, a yellow cat-shaped thing on 2 legs, 1.5 meters, black stripes, and pads on its hands and feet that throw current. He knelt before he spoke. Raijin, hello my lord, the first life I ever made. I gave him language and a basic map of the world, and nothing else. And I told him 3 things. You are a mink born overseas, get along with the girl, and one day, be king. Ilara took that badly, not visibly. Ilara does not do visibly, but she had been first, and she had been the closest, and now there was a creature that had come out of me directly, and I watched her decide, in real time and in total silence, that she was going to outwork him. I have been quietly enjoying the results ever since. Sakura's reaction was simpler. She sniffed him, decided he was the real overseas mink she had always suspected existed, rubbed her face on his face, and adopted him. The full moon was 4 days later. I did not know about the full moon. Nobody told me about the full moon. She had spent 3 years off her island and had lost track of the calendar, and back home the young ones are simply locked indoors on those nights, and she was outside on Winter Island seeing snow for the first time in her life when she happened to look up. The change took about 2 seconds. Shadow fur, long tail, and gone. Not stronger, gone. Untrained minks under a full moon do not become warriors. They become a fire that burns until the moon sets or the body stops, and there is no third option. She went through the compound. Alara could not stop her because Alara was trying not to hurt her. Raijin could not stop her because Raijin was 4 days old. She got most of the way across the island before she ran directly into Baron, who was walking out of my house at the wrong moment, as is his custom, and got both feet in the face. He caught her by reflex and held on. 100 kilos of lightning-soaked wolf in the hands of a man who had genuinely just stepped outside for some air. I rang a bell. That is all it was, a tone. It reaches into anything that has been knocked out of its right state and puts it back, and the fire went out of her mid-scream and she went limp, and we put her to bed and hung heavier curtains. She woke up at noon convinced she had killed somebody. She had not touched a soul. She had wrecked 2 fences and a woodpile. And Baron, the man she had kicked in the face at speed, spent that afternoon explaining the moon to her, patiently, in words a 10-year-old could follow, while she ate a chicken whole, bones included. I gave Raijin a coat of white fur he can switch on, so that he can pretend to have the same condition. It seemed kinder than explaining that he is not, technically, a mink. Then the wheel came round again, and Riverton drew the smallest wedge on the board. I need to walk you through this properly, because the crew have never gotten over it, and neither have I. The man had already won once, and he had won by luck. He had been bouncing around on the water behind the island in his brand new splash power, playing, not fighting, and had personally intercepted the entire escaping fortune of the organ trafficking assassination group because their treasure boat had gone out the back way. So he got the wheel again, and his dart hit a wedge the width of a finger. Then he had to draw an element, and he drew water, no fruit needed, no waiting, no fear of the sea, which is the single most valuable roll on the board. And then he drew the specific creature, and his luck finally ran out in the most public way imaginable. Red scales, gold whiskers, 2 of them, coming off his face. And for about 3 seconds, every pirate on that beach thought he had drawn something related to Ryuga, and went completely silent with envy. Then the transformation finished. He had drawn a carp. I want to be fair to Magikarp. A crowd of 400 men laughing themselves sick on a beach is not fair to Magikarp. So let me tell you what the crowd found out over the next 4 minutes, which is that the carp does not drown, that the carp breathes underwater, that the carp jumps 40 feet, and that when Riverton drew a knife and stabbed himself in the arm, the blade skated off his scales without leaving a mark. Bullets? No. Ordinary swords? No. You need a man who can cut steel to cut him. He is the only person in this crew who can go anywhere in the ocean and come back. And a year later, when I needed the entire seabed searched, there was exactly one candidate, and he was the joke of the fleet. The laughing stopped in stages. It has never entirely stopped. Then Sterling printed our massacre and called it justice. That is the newspaper man, enormous albatross, owns the only global paper, and when 200 freed prisoners started telling ports across the New World about the pirates who burned down the organ trade, he did not check a single fact. He hired writers, filled in the gaps with invention, and ran a front page about the noble beasts pirates and their crusade. None of it was true, and all of it was correct. A young Marine at headquarters read it and went red, and started shouting that pirates do not get to use that word. He will matter later. The government held a meeting about us and could not agree. Half of them had made money off the organ traders and wanted us erased. The other half had been competing with the organ traders and had just inherited their entire market and were quietly delighted. Nothing was done. Nothing is ever done when both halves of a room have been paid. And in 6 rooms on 6 different islands, 6 people picked up communication snails at the same hour and put a face on a screen. The loan shark, the newspaper man, the queen of the pleasure districts who is also a government agent, which everybody in that room knew and nobody said. The shipping king who owns the secret currents, the warehouse king who hides what the shipping king moves, and a young assassin broker who had just inherited the murder half of a dead man's business. The kings of the underworld in emergency session, trying to work out why Ryuga had erased an entire industry for no reason. Sterling, you really don't know why? What if I told you the news is true? That is no joke, said the assassin broker, shifting in his seat, because his business is a great deal like the one that had just been deleted. And then the woman spoke, slowly, and told them she had received an invitation, a tea party, and on the guest list, for the first time in history, a pirate with no blood relation to the host. I did not go to the tea party. I sent Ryuga, Baron, and every child we owned. I have been asked about that a lot, so let me answer it. I stayed away because there was a government agent at that table. I knew there would be. Everybody at that table knew there would be, and everybody had known for years exactly which of them it was, and they all kept inviting her, because a spy you can identify is worth more than a spy you cannot. But I had a bounty of 5,000 berries and a filing card that said pet, and that is the single most valuable asset I owned. The moment I sit down at a table with her, that stops being true. She goes home and writes one sentence, and one sentence turns me from a curiosity into a line item. So I sent my partner to be famous at them, and I went the other way with Prince, and I want to admit something. I did not like it. I sat on my own ship, 3 weeks away, and I thought about a 10-year-old wolf and a 100-year-old girl and a 4-year-old made of lightning walking into a fortress belonging to the most dangerous woman alive, and I thought about it a great deal, and I did it anyway. Because being underestimated is worth more than being comfortable. I got the report afterward, in pieces, out of order, from 4 people who all thought they were the main character. Here is what I have been able to reconstruct. That was deliberate. I had a search of my own to run and a reputation to not have, and if I show up in a room containing a government agent, then the government starts having opinions about me. So Ryuga took the Beast Prince south with a hold full of fruit and a deck full of miners, and I went the other way with Prince. The sea around that woman's kingdom is juice, actual juice, colored, sweet, and warm. There is a fruit pie floating on it the size of a fort with guns in it. There are cottages made of cake with people living in them and a demolition crew whose entire job is to eat the buildings before they go stale. And there are things walking around that used to be objects, because she can put a piece of a soul into a teapot, and the teapot will then have views. Sakura hung off the rail with both hands, too short to see over it, narrating everything. Luciano came out to escort them in, entirely professional, no mention whatsoever of the last time he had seen these people, which had involved him being buried up to his neck. And Sakura looked at the man's enormous tongue and said, out loud, in a carrying voice, that it was longer than her uncle's back home. Then, halfway up the mountain, she stopped and started sniffing. I smell something rotten. Luciano explained, patiently, that there is no rotten food on that island, that the entire kingdom is a pantry and the pantry is managed. It isn't food, it's a person. It's the same smell as the manager. Ryuga did not react. Ryuga said, then they'll come to us. Wait. Because he had worked out what she meant. The organ trafficking assassination group had not stopped existing when we killed its head. It had a whole armed division that had been out on jobs, and those men had spent 2 months watching their industry get carved up by their competitors, and they had one target for it, and they had found out where he would be. The tea party had already begun above them. A photograph of an old nun carried in under guard, because that photograph is the most important object in that woman's life, and she has erased people over it. Everyone seated. Gifts stacked, banana mousse coming out of the kitchen on trolleys. She had the spoon halfway to her mouth when the gunfire started below. Her second son talked her out of going down herself, which took nerve, and did it with a good argument, that she is the host and the guests are watching. And did it for a real reason, which is that his elder brother was down there and had already failed twice this year, and a third failure in front of their mother would not be survivable. Luciano, for his part, looked at the assassins pouring into his corridor and visibly aged. Why, I am told, he said, when it is my turn. Ryuga turned to the 10-year-old at his elbow. Kid, that's your enemy, isn't it? That's him. I remember his stink. Then do you still have the nerve to show your teeth to it? That is the entire trick. That is all it took. She was gone past Luciano before anyone could grab her. 10 years old, no weapon, straight down a corridor at a professional murder squad. Ryuga, still watching, said to Raijin, I know what he told you to do. Go. She can't win, and a rescue leaves the deepest impression. I want it noted that I did not authorize that, and I want it noted that it worked. What the corridor saw was a yellow streak. Raijin's power is not speed in the ordinary sense. It is a switch. He picks a point. He is at the point. And the useful version, the one he invented himself because nobody taught him this, is that he can pick an ally, arrive in front of them, hit whatever they are running at, and throw them back out of the fight in the same motion. So Sakura's charge lasted about 1.5 seconds before she was airborne going the other way. Too early for you. Learn to walk. Then he turned around and went through the corridor, less than a minute, dozens of them, professional, armed, and they simply came apart, because there is no answer to a thing that arrives before the decision to block it. He used fists, not claws, which took me a moment to understand until I remembered there were children watching. The eldest son of the strongest woman on the sea stood in a melted corridor watching his own walls run, and revised a great many opinions about the mink tribe. Upstairs, the tea party proceeded as though nothing had happened, because that is how those parties work. The children were sent to a side table with her children. Baron was left standing, because the seats at that table are for kings of industry, and Baron is a scientist. And when Ryuga nodded, Baron put a small case on the table and opened it. I want to describe the silence. Every person in that room had spent the previous 8 minutes privately guessing what was in it. New narcotics, heads in ice, weapon contracts, a treaty. The government agent later admitted she had settled on heads. It was fruit, 3 kinds of fruit, arranged neatly, smelling extremely good. Nobody moved. Nobody knew what to say. 2 remnants of the most feared crew in living memory had convened the entire criminal aristocracy of the New World, and the agenda item was produce. Then everybody tasted it, and the room changed. I will not oversell this. It is fruit, but it is fruit that does not exist anywhere else on this planet. grown from stock that came out of my own body, and the people at that table do not sell to farmers. They sell to kings. They sell a fruit platter for tens of thousands in establishments where the price is the point. Baron did the numbers. 6,000 acres identified, 10,000 tons a year within 12 months, 2 tons available immediately after the host's cut. And the detail that closed it, the plants are sterile. Third-generation seeds do not grow. Nobody can ever copy it. There will be exactly one supplier forever. They took it in about 4 minutes. The newspaper man asked his question then, because he cannot help himself. Why did you destroy the organ traders? And Ryuga gave him 7 words. They offended my subordinates. Unforgivable. Anything else? And every person at that table relaxed, visibly, because a grudge is a shape they understand. A grudge has a cause and an end. What had frightened them was the possibility of a man erasing an industry for no reason, because an industry is what each of them is. Then Baron laid out the other 2 asks. Premium prices for every beast-type devil fruit anyone finds. No questions. And a picture. Just a picture. A stone tablet, hexagonal, wide at the top. Even a rumor. If it checks out, name your price. The host squinted at it and asked what it was for. And Ryuga, and I have to give the man credit because we had not rehearsed this, said he intended to forge the strongest armor in the world out of a metal nobody could scratch, which is a perfect lie. It is a lie that fits him. Everybody in that room has met a strong man with a collecting habit, and everybody in that room went away satisfied, and not one of them ever connected a piece of rock to the horse standing at the back of the photographs. The company was founded that afternoon. Beasts Fruit Products, legally registered, tax-paying, a front so thin you could read a newspaper through it, and completely untouchable because the profit was already flowing to people who mattered. 3 years later, it was the 7th king of the underworld, and it got there on fruit. Meanwhile, Prince and I went to a country where the war had never stopped. Galtzburg. That is not on any modern map. It is a place that split in half over a dead king's succession and then spent decades feeding its own children into the gap. And by the time we arrived, the war had ended 4 days earlier, which was the problem. It had ended because one boy ended it. 14 years old. A war orphan raised by the army as ammunition. Literally, that is what they call those boys. They are given the name and a number and sent to walk on the minefields ahead of the real soldiers. He was number 9. He wanted a medal. He got betrayed by his own squad for it, killed them, and kept the medal. And after that, he worked alone. Then he found a devil fruit that lets him fuse with anything he touches and rebuild it into weapons, and he became a national hero, and his commanding general became a general on the back of it. And then that general promised him freedom after the final battle, while privately arranging for him to die in it. He did not die in it. He took the enemy positions single-handed, came back, worked out what had been done to him, and unmade the entire country. Arthur Cannon. Remember that name too. We landed on Ash. Vultures too well fed to run from men. Bodies in the streets, buildings down, and under those buildings, people still alive. I told our crew to dig, not as a policy. I had no interest in that country. But you cannot search rubble for a stone tablet without lifting the rubble. And once you have lifted it and there is a living person underneath, you have already made the decision. Which is how our men and a squad of Marine recruits ended up on opposite sides of the same boulder, heaving together, and then getting it off, and then seeing each other's uniforms. Blue coats. Skull tattoos. Everybody's weapons came up at once. Nobody fired. There was a child crying under the next slab, and a Marine medic decided the child was more important, and both groups backed away from each other in stages, still aiming, until there was enough distance to pretend it had not happened. Their instructor was on that island, a former admiral, retired to teaching, running his graduates through a live exercise that was supposed to be the capture of Cannon and had become a relief operation because Cannon had walked through them. I did not want that fight. I want to be extremely clear about this, because a great many people take the opposite view, and I think they are fools. What do I gain by killing an admiral? A headline. A permanent, personal, unlimited campaign against every island I own. The government has hundreds of member states and can promote a new one inside a year. That trade is a catastrophe, and everybody who makes it discovers so afterward. So we left. He came after us, of course, and I put a fire vortex on him, not a fireball. A vortex anchored into the ground, tall enough to be seen from the sea, and it does not burn out, and it cannot be punched through because the force goes into it and does not come back. He got out of it by digging with his bare hands underneath the flame line and coming up outside, and it cost him every hair on his body. He came up bald and furious, and we were already gone. The survivors on that island later decided a god had been angry, and the report he filed, because he never saw me do it, because he assumed it was Prince, put Prince's bounty at 300 million. Prince, who had done nothing at all that day, became the second most wanted man in our crew for a fight he never had, and he has never once corrected the record. The bounty caused an immediate problem, as bounties do. We stopped at an herb island to resupply, and I sent Prince to find a plant Gaston had sketched, and 100 and some bounty hunters surrounded the shop he was standing in. They were not there for him. That is the joke. They were there for the shopkeeper, and Prince had walked into somebody else's ambush and was in the way, and he told them politely to work around him. Then they saw the poster. He went out through the front wall. Wings, rocks, fire, his whole style is falling meteors, which is a great deal more theatrical than it needs to be, and I have decided not to interfere with the boy's aesthetic choices. They shelled him with gas, anesthetic strong enough to drop something enormous, bought in a fire sale from the collapsing remains of the organ traders, and it did nothing at all, because Prince's body was medically tortured for 6 months as a child, and there is not much left in a bottle that impresses it, and because his mask filters air. The shopkeeper took nothing at all, because the shopkeeper ate 4 different compounds off her own shelf in the time it took the gas to cross the room. Her name is Willow, 80 years old, currently in her 40s because she has a drug for that, ship's doctor of the world pirates, Knox's crew, hiding on a herb island since the government took her captain. She offered him a deal in the middle of a firefight, seeds of the extinct plant he was looking for, in exchange for extraction. Then Prince fought a schoolteacher. That is the correct description. The bounty hunters had a specialist on retainer, and this man's power lets him declare an area a classroom, and inside the classroom, he has authority, and the authority is written on a blackboard growing out of his stomach. He wrote a word, and every flame on the island went out at once, not smothered, ended. Then he hit one of our men with a pointer and wrote silent, and the man could not speak. Then he used the entire remaining surface of his blackboard to write, in large letters, the name King, and announced that the accused would now stand still and accept his punishment. Nothing happened, because Prince is not his name. Prince is a title I gave a boy on a boat because he did not want the old one out loud. His name is Ethan, and the power only binds a true name, and this man had just spent his single largest asset on a word he read off a wanted poster. Prince crossed the gap and put a fist through his head and said, "You talk too much." I have thought about that a great deal since. Nearly every pirate on this ocean sails under the name their mother gave them. It has never occurred to any of them that it is a handle. Willow came home with us and refused to join. She has refused every year since. She takes the salary, $150 million a year now, which is more than her own bounty, which means it would be cheaper to sell her, and she does the work, and she calls Knox her only captain, and she has never once wavered on it. I stopped asking. I like that about her. In an ocean where every crew is one bad week from mutiny, I have on my payroll a woman who will not change flags for a fortune, and I would very much like some of that to rub off. Then 3 years went by. I am going to say that quickly because it went quickly. 3 years of the fruit company eating the high end of every market from here to the 4 seas. 3 years of the wheel, and by the end of it there were dozens of them, most of them ordinary, most of them fruit-based, because we had blown through 2 years of collected devil fruits feeding the winners. 3 years of Sakura growing up in a pirate fortress on Winter Island with a lightning cat and a 100-year-old girl and a scientist who taught her the moon. 3 years of Raijin refusing to get any taller. 3 years and 1 more tablet, grass. And at the end of it, I called everyone who had ever been changed by me into one room and gave them a New Year present. A dry, ugly, twisted stalk of weed in a box each. They were extremely polite about it. It is called revival herb, I said. When you are finished, not tired, finished, on the ground, done, eat it. It is not a cure. It puts you back on your feet with your strength back, and it tastes so bitter you will taste nothing else for 3 days. The room went absolutely silent, because what I had just handed out to 12 people in a box is a second life. Everyone in that room has watched a friend run out of stamina in the wrong minute and die of it. That is what killing is in this world. It is not damage, it is running out. Raijin went to one knee first because he understood fastest. Then everybody did, and then it got out of hand, and Baron began composing something, and I told them all to stand up before the scientist started rhyming. And that was the exact moment Ryuga kicked the door open with 2 babies. He came in out of a blizzard with snow on his shoulders and a bundle under each arm and said, "I have something to show you." One of them was wrapped carefully. One of them was wrapped in an unidentified animal skin like a packed lunch. Everybody crowded the wrong cradle. I want to be precise because it is the funniest 30 seconds in the history of this crew. The baby they crowded was about a meter long, visibly muscular, already had teeth, and looked like it could hold a door shut. Grown men were leaning over it saying, "Of course he's Ryuga's, look at those arms," and "a worthy heir." And Ryuga stood there getting more and more confused until he pushed through and looked. "That's not mine. I found that one on a beach. He'd been in the water for days and hadn't died, so I brought him." He pointed at the other cradle. At a small, pink, entirely ordinary-looking infant. "That's my daughter." The room did not recover for some time. The girl was 43 days old. Her name was Akari. Her mother was, and remains, none of my business, and he has never said, and I have stopped asking. The boy had a shell tied to him with words carved in it, because paper does not survive the sea. His name, his birthday, and a short note explaining that he was a fishman child who did not look like a fishman, so his father had disposed of him and hoped a kind person would find him. His name was Liam. He was picked up on the way, and to this day when anyone asks how he joined the crew, that is the answer. Alara rocked the cradle. She has never spoken about the third Lunarian. She did not speak about him then, but she stood there, rocking a cradle with a completely different expression on her face than I have ever seen on it, and Akari grabbed her finger and would not let go. And that is when we discovered our first real problem. Nobody could feed her. Ryuga's answer answer was to ask whether there were any wet nurses available on the island, and when told that the child's grip would injure an ordinary woman, he suggested, seriously, alcohol. So I went and bought 2 cows. I paid well over the market rate because nobody actually wanted to sell, and I walked them back up the road, and by the time we reached the house, they were no longer cows. Upright, pink, 20 liters a day each, and the milk is genuinely one of the best things I have ever made. Then I made 4 nurses to go with them, round, pink, aproned, and constitutionally incapable of doing anything except caring for something small. Ryuga looked at a bipedal cow being milked into a bottle by a creature shaped like an egg, and sobered up noticeably. "Why don't you just be her godfather?" he said. "Save time." I want to be honest about why I said yes. Partly because somebody had to, and the alternative was a man whose stated childcare plan began at age 3 with combat drills. Partly because it ties our 2 houses getting together with something stronger than a contract. And partly because he asked at the exact moment I was holding a bottle, and there is no good way to refuse a man while doing that. We also decided to move. Winter Island had been the right base when we were small. It is a factory town in permanent snow, and it is not where you raise anything. The plan was a spring island. The plan changed. Her 100th day came first, and there is a ceremony for that here, and I made the mistake of asking the officers to each contribute 2 items for the grabbing right. You place objects around a baby. What she grabs supposedly indicates her future. Traditionally, a book for learning, a coin for wealth, a brush, a seal, that sort of thing. I lifted the cloth and found grenades, live ones, pins exposed, also several sharpened swords, several loaded firearms, an ancient devil fruit that a teething infant could plausibly bite, a bottle of milk, a plate of roast meat, a piece of Alara's own clothing, and my flag. I removed the grenade with a vine at speed. I asked, at volume, who had thought a devil fruit was appropriate. I was told she had no teeth. I pointed out that this child has a grip that injures adults. And in the middle of it all was a small club, spikes filed to rounded knobs, obviously handmade. "You did this," I said to Ryuga. "That is not a club, that is Ken. You named a club. Famous swords have names, why is a club different? Then yours is called what, exactly?" "Hasaikai. You genuinely did not know the name of my weapon?" I changed the subject. She took the club. Straight past the gold, straight past the food, straight past everything I had put down to give her a chance at a career in something other than violence, and she picked up a weapon that an ordinary infant could not lift, and swung it twice, and threw it at Baron's stomach. It bounced. She laughed. She crawled after it, which was also the first time she had ever crawled. Then she grabbed the crown, and then she went for the milk, and then she started eyeing the devil fruit and the sake gourd, and both her fathers removed every remaining item from the floor at exactly the same instant. And the old woman with candles on her head arrived. I am not being poetic. She had a white cloth band tied around her forehead with 2 lit candles standing in it. It is a folklore reference in the country she came from. To us, she looked like a lunatic who had set her own hair on fire. Clyde, on patrol, told 2 men to throw her in the sea. She talked her way onto the island by shouting that she had a matter of national importance for our captain, and in the hall she made her pitch. And the pitch was a country, Wano, a closed nation, over 1 million people. Master smiths who make weapons a century ahead of anything on the open sea, using a metalworking tradition nobody outside has ever learned. And under it, the only large deposit in the world of the stone that switches off devil fruits. All of it. In exchange for one thing, kill the heir and put her family's man on the throne. Her name was Murakami Akira, and the grudge she was carrying was 2 generations old. Her family had tried to take the shogunate by poisoning every rival lord in a single season, and it had worked, and then the sitting shogun had a son anyway, and the plot came apart, and her grandfather was ordered to open his own stomach, and the family lost everything and became the most hated name in that country. She had gone abroad. She had come back with a devil fruit that lets her wear other people's faces, and she had spent years wearing the shogun's. The real shogun was in a cell. She had staged his death, publicly, so convincingly that the entire nation held a funeral, and installed her own man as acting shogun in the interim. There was only one problem left, and it was sailing home eventually. Minamoto Kaito, the rightful heir. Currently 2nd Division Commander on Whitebeard's ship, which is a sentence that should make any sensible person put down the map and go home. Ryuga asked the obvious question, why cut you in? Why not just take the country? And she gave the correct answer, which is the only reason this went anywhere. Because Wano is not an island you can hold by force. 1 million people who hate outsiders, terrain built to be defended, samurai lords in every province. You would win, and then you would spend 20 years bleeding into rebellions. Come in through the front door with a legitimate invitation, and you get all of it and none of that. Baron field stripped the sample weapons on the floor of the hall, reassembled them, and confirmed she was not lying. The quality was extraordinary. Sakura, meanwhile, had picked up a grenade to see what it was, and Baron had to carry her out of the room by the scruff of the neck at a dead run. Ryuga agreed, and afterward, in private, he told me exactly what he intended, which was to take the invitation, walk in the front door, and then never leave. Not everyone is qualified to be a partner. I approved. I even improved on it. Let the man ruin the country's mood for a while. Let him tax and conscript and make himself hated, and let us be the ones building orchards next to it. You cannot buy that kind of contrast. People do not love a liberator. They love the one who was visibly better than the alternative while the alternative was still there. Then she left us a gift box from her master, and I opened it. Inside was a tablet, and it was fake. I need you to understand what happened in me, because I have been calm for most of this story, and I stopped being calm for about 90 seconds. There are two things I cannot let go. One is somebody coveting a piece of me. The other is being lied to about it. And this was both at once, wrapped in a bow, hand-delivered. They had made it in Wano. Perfect shape, perfect proportions, forged out of the ore that grows alongside the devil fruit stone. Hard as anything in that country, unmarkable by any blade they had, produced by the finest smiths alive. Because Ryuga had told a room full of underworld kings that he wanted an indestructible rock for armor, and that story had traveled, and these people had decided to be helpful and had not been able to find one, so they built one. Every Pokemon on that island went down. That is what I found out that afternoon, that when I lose my temper, the things I have made feel it. The nurses collapsed on the floor of the nursery in a shaking heap. The cows went down in the field. Raijin, who is not a small creature, could not stand up. Sakura asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Nothing, don't worry about me." Ryuga, who has known me for years and had seen this face exactly once, said, "What is it?" I turned the forgery into powder and told him, and he said, without any hesitation at all, "Prince, Baron, tell the men, we're going to war. I want to note that." He was ready to throw away the country, the mine, the smiths, and the plan, immediately, over an insult to me, which is precisely why I calmed down. "Ryuga, I'll give you face. Your plan runs. I will spare that family exactly as long as they are useful," because the correct answer was not to burn the invitation. The correct answer was to accept it, walk in, take everything they had, drain them dry, and then judge them at leisure. He looked at me for a second and then said, "In that case, let's have a banquet." 3 ships went to Wano, 200 elite, 1 flagship, 1 new vessel of mine called the Origin, and 1 enormous cargo hull belonging to Baron. On the way, I made a fish. There are giant carp in the currents outside that country. Freshwater fish, in the open sea, grown to the size of boats, strong enough to swim up a waterfall that no ship can climb. Every one of them is a small miracle of adaptation, and nobody had ever looked twice at them. I picked out the 4 liveliest, and I changed them all the way down. Not a granted ability, a permanent conversion, right through the bloodline, so that their children are born as what I made, and their children's children after that. And what I made them into was the most common, most disrespected, most numerous creature I know. A red carp that survives anything, breeds like weather, and can live in the sea, a river, a lake, a swamp, or a puddle. Give that 4 generations, and it is in every ocean on this planet. I told them one thing. Look for a shape, come back and report. I have an underwater search network now. It cost me an afternoon. Nobody will ever notice it because who counts carp? The waterfall opened, and we went down into the dark under it, and up an elevator into an inland sea, and the first thing Ryuga did was insult the garrison. Deliberately, loudly, at the dock, at volume, with 100 armed men within earshot. He asked Prince how long it would take him to kill all of them. 3 minutes. Too slow, said Baron. 1. This terrain only needs a single gas round. The old woman went gray. She had told him these were her master's men. She had brought him here as an ally, and he was pricing her garrison in front of her garrison, on purpose, at exactly the moment the ramp went down. Somebody shouted back. Of course somebody shouted back. That country is proud in a way that does not survive contact with an audience, and these were not loyal retainers, they were hired swords, and one of them told a 6-meter stranger that he could not take 1 man in a minute, let alone 100. Was it you who said that? Then pick your opponent. Anyone on my ship. And the man looked at a deck full of monsters and picked the smallest person on it. He picked Irina, 14 years old, 4 feet tall thanks to a ring, and the entire crew of the Beast Prince started laughing so hard that several of them had to sit down, and the samurai believed they were laughing at him for choosing a weakling, and they were not. They were laughing because of every single person on that deck except the officers. He had chosen the worst possible one. Ryuga gave her 4.5 minutes. She asked to swap. She was told no. She sighed, grew claws, and went over the rail. What the old woman saw was this. The first samurai went down to a claw strike, and then the other 99 drew their swords and attacked each other. Not gently, hard, with intent, screaming names, for 4 minutes and 27 seconds, until the last one standing was put down by a girl who had barely moved from the spot. She apologized afterward for taking so long. Some of them, she explained, had been difficult to score cleanly. And then Ryuga told the old woman that her garrison was clearly not capable of defending the only entrance to the country, and that as a gesture of alliance, he would be taking over the door. She could not say yes. She could not say no. She said the shogun was waiting. The march to the capital went through open country, and every farmer in the province came out to look, because there had not been an outsider in that nation in living memory, and we had arrived with a walking cow, a bipedal cat that throws lightning, a giant blue lizard, 4 egg-shaped nurses, and a horse-shaped god. Then the banquet, and I have to tell you about the banquet. Ryuga complained about the food. He complained about the sake being weak, which it was. He complained that a server had stepped forward with the wrong foot. He generated one grievance after another for 2 hours purely to make a man sweat. And he did it while never once letting a drop of alcohol past his lips. Every cup went down the front of his coat, while acting drunker by the hour. Then he stood up, told the dancers they were ugly, walked into the middle of the floor, and performed a dance. And halfway through the dance, his club left his hand and went at the shogun's head. It stopped a hand's width from the man's face against a wall of nothing. "Ryuga, what are you doing?" "Terribly sorry. I drank too much. My hand slipped." Nobody in that hall believed it. The problem is that nobody in that hall could prove it, and there is a very large difference in law and in war between a killing and an accident, and Ryuga had just very publicly established that he is a man whose hand slips. Our own crew helped, immediately and without being asked. It's true, he does this. Last time he flew into a naval base and danced. That was ages ago. Wasn't the recent one that fellow he fought? Doesn't matter, he's dead. But it had done its real job, which was to make the shogun show his card, and the card was a barrier, an absolute one, the kind nothing gets through, held by a family retainer with 2 crossed fingers who had been standing in the shadows all evening. Now we knew. That is what the whole performance was for. Then I stopped him because there was money on the table. "Ryuga, enough. We are guests." And the man in the fine robes looked up sharply because somebody had just used the terrifying stranger's name without a title, and the terrifying stranger had listened. I turned to him and asked for a subsidy. "We have 1,000 men," I said. "They have been at sea a long time. We noticed you have a pleasure district. A few dozen gold each should cover it." He nearly came out of his skin. A few dozen gold each across 1,000 men is the entire cash reserve of a man who has just bought a shogunate and still owes his own soldiers. He had assumed we would loot. Pirates loot. Pirates do not submit an invoice. He paid. I want to explain why I asked for money instead of something useful, because Baron asked me the same thing afterward, and I did not answer him at the time. I did it to find out what he loves. That is all it was. I had been in a room with the man for 2 hours, and I could not read him. He had watched a club go at his own head and had not flinched properly. He had been insulted, mocked, ignored, and had swallowed all of it, and I could not tell whether that was patience or cowardice or a plan. So I asked him for money. And the man came apart, not visibly. His face was fine, but I was watching his hands, and his hands went white, and he did the sum out loud under his breath, and I had my answer inside 4 seconds. He does not love the throne. He does not love his family's name. He does not even really love his revenge. He has been quite happy to postpone that for years. He loves the money, and everything else is a machine he built to get it. That is the most useful thing I learned that entire year, because a man who wants a throne is dangerous. He will do brave things at bad moments. A man who wants money is a lever, and you can find out exactly where he will stop by putting a number in front of him, and I now knew precisely how much I could take from him before he would do something stupid. I have taken slightly less than that every year since, and on the way out I stopped at his shoulder and gave him a present of my own. Sweet dreams, General. It is a small technique. It puts a face in the dark behind your eyes. He did not sleep at all that night, and by dawn the things behind his eyelids had progressed from monsters to a man with a club, and then to Minamoto Kaito coming home, and I have never once regretted it. Everyone went to the pleasure district on the shogun's money, which produced 2 incidents. The first is that Gaston joined the queue, 200 years old, widowed for most of them. He shuffled up to Baron with his hands behind his back, doing an enormous amount of coughing. And Baron, who is a great many things but is not unkind about this particular subject, gave him a double handful of gold, told him to enjoy himself, and then began winking violently at something over his shoulder. His daughter was standing right there. There was a silence. "Papa, where are you going?" Never mind, do as you like. And she pushed her own allowance into his hands and said, "Get an expensive one, don't catch anything," and rode away on a lizard. He stood in the street holding 2 people's money and did not, in the end, go anywhere. The second incident is not funny at all, and it is the reason we own a house in that district to this day. There was a woman on the 2nd floor of one of those establishments with a baby on her back, and the baby had horns. She had been redeemed years earlier by an outsider, a shipwrecked man who sold everything he owned to buy her out, and who could not get work anywhere in that country afterward because of his face. So they both stayed on at the house doing chores and raising a daughter in a back room. He was dying, some months of it by then, and a girl came running upstairs, shouting that a man with horns had come, bigger than Uncle Shadow, and that the outsiders were calling him Ryuga. His name was Gale Shadow. He had been a cook in an army in a kingdom on the other side of the world, in the same squad as a boy who was already the strongest soldier that country had. His wife carried him downstairs. He could not walk. He got out into the street on her shoulder and shouted a name across a crowd of pirates, and the largest man in that hemisphere turned around and remembered him instantly. "You. I still remember your drunken ox. Nobody else ever made it taste like that." And then Shadow, in the time he had left, told him what had happened to their country. That after Ryuga was sold to a prison ship, the official story was desertion, and nobody believed it because the moment he was gone, the kingdom started losing every battle it fought, that it failed to buy its way into the World Council, that it stopped being able to pay its dues to the government and lost its membership entirely, that the old king ran, and the army held the borders on their own, and most of them went to sea afterward, a lot of them because of him. Then he got to the point, because he had rationed his breath for it. My body won't last. For the sake of what we were, take care of my wife and my daughter. Her name is Yumi. This is Sophia. And Ryuga said, I understand. I will take good care of them. And Gale Shadow died about a minute later, because the only thing keeping him upright was the errand. Ryuga gave him a drink from home first, a bottle he had happened to have, from an old comrade he had run into a year before. The man tasted it and said, that's home. And then, Ryuga, please. And that was all of it. Riverton bought the entire establishment that night, not the woman. The building, the staff, the deeds on the shogun's account, because Ryuga said to, and because Riverton has correctly identified that proximity to power is a career. Yumi came with us. So did the baby. That was Yumi's decision, and her stated reason was that she wanted her daughter to grow up somewhere else. I carried that man's body back to the ship myself. Ryuga was going to do it. I took it off him, because Ryuga had 1,000 men in a pleasure district to get moving, and because I wanted the walk. I did not know Gale Shadow. I had never heard his name until that evening. I had watched him spend the last 4 minutes of his life on an errand, and the errand was a woman and a baby. And he had gotten it done and then let go so fast that I heard it happen. I have thought about that a great deal since, and I have decided it is the most competent thing I have ever seen anybody do. He had been dying for months. He had a wife who could not read, a daughter with horns, no money, no citizenship, and no friends in a country that called him a monster in the street. And he had held on, I mean physically held on, past the point where the body files its paperwork, waiting for a single specific piece of luck to walk past a window. And it did. And he spent all of it in one transaction. I put him on the deck and I sat with him for a while, and Yumi came and stood on the other side and did not cry until much later, and the baby slept through the entire thing. Then I made a decision I have not revisited. That child gets through. Not charity. Everything. The same nurses, the same milk, the same tutors, the same training, the same seat at the same table as the daughter of the strongest man in this ocean. Her mother stays on my payroll for life, whether she works or not, because I have watched what this world does to the people who get promised something by a dying man. I told Yumi that on the deck. She asked me why, and I gave her the true answer, which is that her husband made his last transaction with the one man in this ocean who does not break contracts, and I intended to make sure he had chosen correctly. She said, he didn't choose Ryuga. Ryuga was just who was there, which is fair and which does not change anything. That is 3 now. Akari, Liam, Sophia. 3 infants in a pirate fortress with 4 egg-shaped nurses and 2 upright cows, and I would like to remind everyone that 18 months earlier, this crew was 4 people in a soup shop. The shogun's morning report the next day contained the sentence, they forcibly purchased a courtesan house and charged it to you. He had brought us in to ruin his own people. He was watching us invoice him instead, and it was breaking something in his head, and it was about to get considerably worse. Because I had a plan for that country, and it was not his plan. 6 provinces. I went through them one at a time with a map. The mountainous one with the mild weather gets the orchards and the cattle in the high pasture. The hill country next to it gets the livestock proper. The capital sits in the middle and becomes the market, with medicine grown in bands up the mountain because the climate stacks in layers there. The northern plain, flat, poor, currently useless, becomes the grain belt, so that the country feeds itself no matter who is angry with us. The rocky province with the stone veins becomes heavy industry because the ore is right there, and hauling ore is what bankrupts factories. And the frozen one becomes final assembly because you can store anything in a place that cold. Forge in one province, assemble in the next, ship from the island in the middle. The shogun's plan was the exact opposite. Factories on the farmland, everywhere, until nothing grew and 1 million people were hungry enough to be governable. So he sat in his castle watching his terrifying foreign muscle plant fruit trees. They are farming, he said to a report. They are raising cattle. That is a real quote. His accomplice was supposed to be draining the country and was instead visibly improving it, and he could not object because the moment he objected he would have to explain to 4 provincial lords why he was against food. The lords, meanwhile, were entirely lost. The one in the Port province had known this shogun back when he was a servant in his own house and had never trusted him, and now sat looking at reports of roads and wages and thought, out loud, that perhaps he had misjudged the man. The one in the Stone province was staring at his new factories with a different problem. The factories were the one part of the plan he had been promised would poison the land. Filthy water, day and night, into the rivers. And the filthy water had stopped arriving. I had put something in the drains. They come out at night. They live in the cracks near the outflow, and they look like oddly colored floor tiles until they move. And they drink the entire discharge before it reaches the river, every night, and they have been doing it for years. Sludge is what they are, poison eaters, and the variant I built has no smell at all. And what they cannot metabolize crystallizes on their backs where Baron's people scrape it off once a month. That poison is now a strategic resource. We sell antidotes made from it. So the shogun's environmental catastrophe silently became a second income stream, and he never learned why, because nobody told him what he was looking at, and he had never seen a factory before in his life, and simply assumed rivers do that. Also, the province's crime rate collapsed because our answer to the local thug population was to put them in the factories on wages under supervision, and the province noticed. I spent that first year in Wano doing something I had never done before, which was ordinary work. I want to describe it because I know what it sounds like. It sounds like the boring part. It was the most important year of my life, and I nearly ruined it twice. Here is the problem I walked into. I had a country. I did not have a single person in it, not one. 1,000,000 people, and every last one of them looked at me and saw a foreign animal that had arrived with the man who was ruining their lives. And I could not fix that with power, because the thing I wanted from them cannot be taken. You can take taxes by force. You can take labor by force. You cannot take somebody's habit of buying bread from your shop instead of the other shop, and that habit is what a country actually is. So I went to the markets myself. I did, in person, for weeks. I would go out with 2 men before dawn and stand at the edge of a market in the capital and watch what people bought and in what order and what they walked past and what made them stop. The first thing I learned is that they would not buy anything from us. Not would not, could not in their own heads. A man would stand at our stall, pick up an apple that was visibly better than every other apple in that market, look at the price, look at my man's foreign face, and put it back down and buy the bad apple. We tried lowering the price. That made it worse. So we put our goods on a local's cart and sold out in an hour. That is when I understood the actual shape of the wall around that country, and it is not the cliffs. A closed nation does not distrust outsiders. It has no category for them. Everything they buy comes from somebody whose grandfather they knew, and a stranger with a cart does not read as a merchant. He reads as an event. We ended up dressing our own people in local clothes to sell things, which worked, and which I disliked enormously, because a business built on a disguise is a business with a deadline. The second thing I learned is that cows are a religious issue. I had made a bull. A very good bull, 3 tails, extremely strong, does the work of about 20 ordinary draft animals in a day, and understands spoken instructions. I offered them for rent at exactly the price of a normal ox because I wanted them in the fields, not in a barn on my island. Nobody took one, not one farmer, for months. Because it had 3 tails, and a thing with 3 tails is a monster, and you do not plow a rice field with a monster, no matter how good it is at plowing. I sat on that for a long time, and then I stopped pushing. I told my men to leave the bulls in a field where farmers could see them, and to stop offering. It took a year. One man took one. Then his neighbor watched him finish a week's work in 2 days, and then his neighbor took one, and now there is a waiting list. That is the whole method. That is everything I know about governing, and I learned it from cattle. You do not argue with a country. You put the better thing where it can be seen, and you wait for one person to be greedy enough to try it, and greed does the rest of the work for free. The third thing I learned nearly killed a lot of people, and it was mine. I had put Alolan muck in the factory drains, and I was extremely pleased with myself about it. Free poison disposal, a crystal export product, and it silently defeated the shogun's entire environmental sabotage plan. Then a boy in the Stone Province found one and touched it. Those crystals are concentrated toxin. That is the entire point of them. He was 11. He put his hand on something brightly colored near a drain because he was 11, and he was in Willow's ward for 9 days, and for 2 of those days, she would not tell me whether he was going to keep the arm. He kept the arm. I stood outside that room and I did the sum on what I had actually done, which was to place 100 poison-eating creatures in the middle of a province full of children without telling anybody they existed, because I had been too pleased with the elegance of it to think about the consequences. We fenced the outflows the same week. We hired local men to guard them, and we paid them well, and we told them exactly what they were guarding, which meant admitting to a province that we had put things in their drains. I expected to be run out of the country. What actually happened is that a village elder came to my island to complain, in person, on a boat, at his age, and shouted at me for an hour, and I let him. And at the end of it, he said something I have carried ever since. You told us. Orochi never tells us anything. That is a very low bar. I had put poison near his grandchildren, and cleared it by telling the truth about it afterward, but it is the bar, and I have not gone under it since. The rest of it was slow and dull, and I loved it. Kibi is the northern plain, and it was the poorest place in that country. Flat, dry, bad soil, and everybody in the capital treated it as the place you get sent to. I put grain there, and then I put a lot of effort into the soil, and I will not pretend that was charity. A country that cannot feed itself is a country that will overthrow you the first bad winter, and I intended to be there a long time. Ringo is under snow most of the year, so I put final assembly there, where nothing rusts. Udon is rock, so the forges went next to the ore instead of hauling ore to the forges, which sounds obvious and is not, because the shogun's plan had factories going up wherever there was flat ground and a village to conscript. And Kudi got the orchards and the cattle, because Kudi is mild and mountainous, and because Kudi belonged to a man who was not there. By the end of that year, I had wages moving through 4 provinces and a coal problem in winter that I solved with something that walks and burns, and about 600 locals on our books who had been unemployable 18 months earlier. The only real resistance came from the mountain province, which belonged to the heir heir who was away at sea. His retainers were not fools. They watched a foreign crew build ranches and win a population over, and they arrived at a conclusion that was, honestly, correct. That this was a campaign to make the people forget who their lords were. So they organized. They talked farmers out of working for us. They went out at night and cut down our crops. And that is where the beasts pirates showed their teeth in that country for the first time. And I let it happen. And I want to be clear about why. Every day those men spent sabotaging orchards was a day a farmer went home to a wrecked field, and the farmer knew exactly whose men had done it. I did not need to win that argument. I needed to lose slowly, in public, while feeding people. I should tell you about the house, because I have spent this whole story talking about tablets, and I have 4 children living on my island. 5, if you count Raijin, and he would very much like to be counted. Akari learned to walk in Wano and immediately became a problem. Not a normal toddler problem. She got up, worked out that legs are faster than crawling, and within a week had exhausted all 4 nurses, who work in shifts and are constitutionally incapable of giving up. I have watched a creature built entirely out of patience sit down on a floor and put its face in its hands because of that child. Her first word was lucky, which is the only sound the nurses make. Not father, not either father. She was raised in a room with 4 egg-shaped women and a talking cow, and she came out of it saying their word. Ryuga pretended not to mind. He minded enormously. He came home from 3 weeks of doing whatever it is he does, walked into that nursery, said his own name to her, hopefully about 11 times, got lucky every time, and went outside and set fire to something. Liam grew faster than she did. He was already outsized as an infant, and he simply kept going. And he grew up in a house full of girls, and I want to be honest that nobody planned that. Akari, then Sophia, then later others, and one enormous fishman boy in the middle of it being aggressively looked after by every single one of them. He is the strongest of the lot by a distance, and he has the personality of a large, friendly door. Sophia is Yumi's daughter, and Yumi is still with us, which matters. She is the only one of these children with a living mother in the house, and I have watched the other 3 notice that and not say anything about it, and I have decided there is nothing useful I can do about it except make sure Yumi stays. And Sakura, who is 13 now and has never gone home. That is the thing I think about. She has a family on the back of a walking elephant, and she has not seen them in 6 years, and she cannot go because we cannot find them. I have tried. I have had our ships change course on rumors. The problem is genuinely unsolvable with the tools I have. The animal never stops moving, and the only way to track it is a scrap of paper cut from a living person, and hers was taken by slavers who are all dead now. She does not talk about it. She writes in a book instead. Every week, without fail, since her first month with us, small things, mostly, what she ate, who annoyed her, what Raijin said. She has filled a drawer. I read one page once, by accident, and it said, "I am not homesick today," which is a strange sentence to write in a diary unless you are keeping score. She mastered the full moon last winter, 6 years after it nearly killed her. She can hold it now, deliberately, and come out of it under her own power. And she came and told me first, before Raijin, before Alara, and I want to be clear that I understood exactly what that was. Then she said, "Now can I have power?" And I said, "Not yet." I want to explain why, since I hand it out to grown men who win a raffle. Because everyone else I have ever changed asked for it as a tool, and she was asking for it as a way to keep up with a boy who is not going to slow down for her. Those are different requests, and only one of them ends well. She got 3 techniques instead, the stacking one, the levitation, and an endurance trick that lets her take 1 hit she should not survive. She was furious for about a day and then worked out that levitation means she can shoot from the air and has not come down since. Meanwhile, Prince and Alara turns 19. That is the part that catches me out. They were 14 on a deck, saying names. Prince is 6 meters tall now, and Baron has stopped making jokes about it. Alara is 3 meters and can catch a broadside. And they still, every single time I go out, arrange between themselves which of them stays, not by rank, by argument. I have listened to them do it through a wall, 2 adults negotiating over who gets to guard an island and who gets to stand next to me, and I have never once been asked my opinion. Last year, Alara lost the argument and stayed, and when I came back, she had reorganized the entire internal discipline system, built a small, quasi-religious organization out of the crew's more enthusiastic members, and started running lessons. I asked her what the lessons were about. "You," she said. "There is a church now, on my islands. I did not authorize it, and I cannot stop it, and the doctrine is approximately 1 sentence long, which is that if you serve well, something impossible happens to you, which, annoyingly, is true, and it is why I cannot argue with a single one of them. The government has noticed it and filed it as a control mechanism Ryuga built to manage his men. Let them. Then I put a baby in charge of navigation. I had been picking search areas by throwing a stone at a chart, which is as good a system as any when you have no information. But Akari was crawling by then, and crawling extremely fast, and I had an idea. I made a chart out of water, floating, glowing slightly, right at eye level for something on all 4s. She poked it. "Ilara, prepare the ship. That's where we're going." Ryuga threw her aboard at the last second. Physically threw. His argument was that she had chosen the destination, and it would be a shame for her to miss her first one. And my argument was that she was under a year old, and his argument was volume. We went to the Edwall Sea. And I need to explain what was already happening there because we sailed into the middle of the largest naval engagement of the last 20 years without knowing it. There is a man who is going to be called the Pirate Prince. Everyone can feel it coming. And there is another man, older, with a fleet of dozens of ships and the ability to make anything he cuts float in the air, who had decided that the coming era should have 2 rulers and had gone to make the offer personally. He surrounded Silas's single ship with his entire fleet and asked him to be his right hand. "I have no interest in ruling the world," said Silas. "Pirates should do what they want." So it became a battle, and it was going badly for the one ship, and then a tsunami came. The New World generates weather the way other places generate mornings. A wall of water the height of a building came across that sea area, and the old man with the fleet looked at it with real concern. And then it flattened. He laughed. He shouted that even the sea had chosen a side. The sea had not chosen a side. The sea had been switched off by a horse standing on a deck 40 miles away, because I had just felt something at the bottom of it and wanted the water to sit still while I worked. "Akari," I said, "you are a lucky star." Lucky? That is the only word she knew. The nurses say it constantly, and it was the first word she ever learned, before either of her fathers. I put the water tablet into the sea, and the sea parted. I do not mean it calmed, I mean it left. It went out to both sides and it stayed there, and the seabed lay open in the daylight, and the tablet came up out of the silt and came home to me. 7. The dragon one. Of all 18, it is arguably the strongest, and I will come back to why finding it with Ryuga's daughter in the room is extremely funny. Then I noticed the problem. That tablet had been sitting between 2 continental plates for a very long time. It had been holding them apart. I had just removed it, and I was now personally holding a fault line closed with my own power, and the instant I let go, the seafloor was going to move. Everyone hold on. Something bigger is coming. I lifted the entire ship into the air with lightning and let go. The wave that came out of that seabed made the first one look like a puddle. Half a fleet was destroyed by it. 2/3 of the ships that had surrounded Silas were simply gone, most of the old man's captains with them, and Silas cut his way out through the gap and ran. And a ship's rudder, thrown by that wave, hit the old man in the head and lodged there. It is still there. His doctors would not remove it because of where it sat. That man has been walking around with a ship's wheel in his skull ever since, and it is one of the most famous facts about him in this ocean, and every single person who repeats it believes it was a storm. It was a filing error. It was me getting my property back and not tidying up afterward. I feel about 11% bad about it. We put in at a nearby island to resupply, and Silas's ship came round the headland an hour later, half dismasted and holed on both sides. They docked on the far side. We stayed where we were. Neither of us raised a flag or a gun. That is a real tradition, and it is one of the few genuinely civilized things pirates do. When 2 crews find each other in a neutral harbor and neither has business with the other, the second one to arrive goes around to the other side, and everybody repairs and everybody leaves. It only breaks down when somebody young is involved. Somebody young was involved. Flynn and Jester came into town for supplies, and Jester, who has a memory like a filing cabinet and a nose you can see from orbit, spotted a small girl in the street and remembered her instantly, because 4 years earlier she had made him beat his best friend unconscious. He wanted revenge. Flynn wanted lunch. They had also, in fairness, prepared. Jester had eaten a devil fruit himself by then, in circumstances he does not enjoy discussing, and Flynn had thought about the problem and come up with a countermeasure, a password. Agree a phrase in advance. The one who cannot say it is the fake. That is genuinely clever. That would work on a lot of illusionists. It does not work on Arena, because Arena edits sound. They walked into the same alley in the same town 4 years later, and they heard each other say the wrong password in each other's voices, and they went at it, and it lasted until distant cannon fire brought them out of it. She dropped the illusion herself at the end and shouted at them that the Navy had arrived and they should get back to their ship. She has never taken it further than that. Both times she could have killed them, and both times she read the intent correctly. 2 boys being idiots, not 2 boys hunting, and she calibrated accordingly. And their first mate was standing behind them when they agreed not to tell anyone. You already know, don't you? I already know. The cannon fire was for us. A Navy-line ship had come into the bay with an admiral aboard, and the admiral had spotted our flag and decided that since he could not have Silas today, he would take what was in front of him. His name was Tatsuya, and at that moment, he was the only serving admiral the Navy actually had. There were supposed to be 3. One had retired to run the training camp. One had spent his entire career refusing the promotion, on the grounds that admirals get assigned to places, and he wanted to be free to chase Silas, which is the single most stubborn career decision I have ever heard of. So Tatsuya was doing the work of 3 men, and had been for years, and his temper reflected it. He had come to that sea area expecting to find 2 legendary fleets tearing each other apart. What he found was a field of wreckage and no explanation. And then he came around the island and found us. I gave the order to leave. I want to say that plainly, because it happened twice in the same year, and both times somebody has since told me I should have fought. Leave. Raise sail. Go. Do not engage. There is nothing on that ship I want. Killing an admiral buys me a headline and a permanent war against every island I own, and the position gets refilled within 12 months by somebody I know less about. The Origin turned to go, and every single person aboard obeyed me except one. Raijin did not move. Did you not hear my order? Forgive me, my lord. I cannot obey. I want to be very careful here, because this is the only time it has ever happened, and because of what he said. If everyone can simply walk up to you, that is an insult to me. I know your power. I am asking you to forgive my willfulness. Our duty is to find what you lost and to stand in front of you. I cannot retreat first. If you have to do everything yourself, then there was no reason to make us. He had been alive 4 years. He had one real fight behind him. I looked at him for a while and said, "Do as you like. You should see the top of this world at least once." And that is how a 4-year-old creature I made out of 5 stone tablets on a night deck ended up in the sky over an admiral's flagship. Their intelligence briefing arrived on the deck below us at almost the same moment, and I would pay real money for a copy. Unidentified creature, 5,000 berries, no other records. That's it? The retired admiral filed something similar last year. Analysis attributed it to Prince the Conflagration. And the mink? No intelligence. New member. So the strategic mind of the entire Navy went into that engagement believing he was looking at a pet and a recruit. I opened with meteors. That is what the Dragon Tablet does when you push it. The sky fills up and comes down, and it does not come down in a line. It comes down everywhere. And a warship is a very large stationary object in a very flat place. He blocked it. Golden light came off him and he grew. And I want to describe what that man's power actually is, because it is the least fair thing in the Navy. He becomes an enormous golden Buddha, and the golden body is armored well past any reasonable standard, and he fires concussion out of his palms in a dome that covers his entire crew. He took the whole first wave on that dome and did not lose a man. You blocked it. So what is your limit? Second wave. Bigger. More of them. Now, one honest note about that attack, since I have promised to be honest about mechanics. Firing it that hard normally leaves me wrung out for a while afterward. It is a strain, not a free action. I have a way of shrugging that off, and it works, and it is the only reason I could throw a second volley at all. It is not infinite. It has never been infinite. If that battle had gone another 20 minutes, I would have had a problem. He knew he had to solve it at the source, and he could not leave because the second he left his deck, that dome came down and his people started dying. So he sent his best young officer. There is a man in this Navy who turns into light. Not fast, light. He was a rear admiral at that point, glasses, permanently unbothered, and he had been quietly identified as one of 3 monsters the Navy was raising to take the admiral's seats. Go and interrupt him. Tatsuya, that sounds like a lot of trouble. Can I not go? What do you think? Oh dear, fine, don't rush me. He turned into a beam and left, and Raijin hit him in midair. I want to be careful about how I frame the next few minutes, because there is a version of this where I claim my creation beat a future admiral, and that version is a lie. He did not beat him. He held him. Here is why it worked at all. That man's power moves at the speed of light, and there is nobody in the Navy who can keep up with him. And the thing nobody has noticed is that his body arrives at light speed and his decisions do not. There is a pause. A tiny one, unmeasurable, between arriving and choosing what to do next. Raijin moves at the speed of electricity, which is close enough, and Raijin is younger and dumber and has better reflexes than judgment. So every time the light stopped, something hit it. Tail across the face, wrapped in hardening, in the middle of a bounce off 3 reflections. Fists in close where lasers are useless. Lightning laid into the air on the exit paths so that the light had somewhere it did not want to go. These youngsters, said the man in the glasses, adjusting them, are getting terrifying. And they fought to a standstill, which meant Raijin won, because a standstill was the entire assignment. From the deck it looked like 2 points of light colliding over and over. Tatsuya, watching his interceptor fail, made the correct decision. He handed off command, timed the gap between my volleys, and moonwalked off his own deck straight at me. He hit me with everything, and went through. I had not been standing there for several seconds. That is a very cheap technique, and it works on almost everybody the first time, because it does not create an illusion, it creates a duplicate, and the duplicate is in the wrong place, and the real one has already moved. Who are you? A man like you cannot be a nobody. Good question. I don't feel like answering it. Instead, how confident are you in your own strength? Then I hit him. Extreme speed. That is what the technique is called, and that is what it is. There is no clever geometry to it. You simply arrive first, always, no matter what the other man does, and you put your entire mass through him before he has finished deciding. It went through the golden body into the organs underneath, and he coughed, and I told him honestly that the armor was better than I expected. He did not answer. He grew, an enormous golden Buddha, sitting cross-legged in the air over the water, reaching for me with a hand the size of a house. Now, I could have finished this several ways. Instead, I grew my own, vines out of nothing, thousands of them, braiding into a wooden giant 100 feet tall with 1,000 arms, floating on lightning, with me standing on its head. There is no mechanical reason for that. The vines hit just as hard without the sculpture. I did it because it looked correct, and because I have spent 2 lifetimes wanting to, and only recently acquired the means, and because somewhere on that ship I distinctly heard a camera shutter. 1,000 wooden fists against a golden Buddha over an ocean at close of day. Then Raijin came back to my side and said, "Forgive me, my lord. He was out. 4 years old, no charging organ of his own, and he had been running on the charge I gave him at birth, and he had just spent a large fraction of it fighting a man made of light. That was the real clock on that battle, and I had forgotten about it, so I ended it. Judgment, grass-typed, straight down off the top of the wooden giant, and it went through the dome and through the golden body and cracked it, and while he was falling, the 1,000 arms kept working, and by the time the man in the glasses caught his admiral out of the air, we were already gone. Are you all right? What do you think? He was not seriously hurt. That armor is genuinely extraordinary." But he went back to headquarters cracked, and the first thing he did on arrival was file a formal complaint about the intelligence department. And I would like to quote his summary in full. That was not a pet. That was a devil fruit user strong enough to threaten an admiral. How does he compare to Silas? To Whitebeard? I do not know. That is difficult to judge. And the fleet admiral told him the truth, which is that the report had not come from the Navy at all. It had come from the government's own intelligence service, incidentally, from an agent who had photographed me on a deck and not thought it worth writing up. And there was going to be a complaint, and the complaint was going to achieve nothing. It achieved nothing. The agent got a written warning and some time off. But it did produce one lasting thing, and I want to flag it, because it is going to matter to somebody eventually. Tatsuya came out of that meeting having decided that the Navy could no longer rely on other people's eyes, and he started building his own intelligence unit, quietly, off the books. I have been indirectly responsible for a great many institutions. I sat down afterward and worked out what I had actually learned, because I had just fought the strongest serving officer in the Navy, and I did not want to walk away with the wrong lesson. Here is my honest assessment of myself after that fight. I won it. I do not think I would win it again. I opened with an attack he had never seen and could not analyze, and I got 2 volleys out of it before he adapted, and the second volley was already less effective than the first. He worked out the interval between them inside 4 minutes. 4 minutes in the middle of holding a shield over 400 men, and he found my rhythm and left his deck at exactly the right moment. I only survived that because I was not standing where he hit. And I have thought a great deal about that punch. It went through a duplicate. If it had gone through me, I would have found out, in public, in front of my own crew, exactly how much of my armor is real, and I do not know the answer to that question, and I have not been in a hurry to find out. I did not beat him with strength. I beat him with novelty. That is a currency that spends once. He has seen the meteors now. He has seen the duplicate and the speed trick, and he has felt what a judgment does to a golden body, and he went home and wrote all of it down, and the next man in that coat will read it before he ever meets me. So I made 2 decisions on that ship. The first is that I stopped showing people things for free. Everything I did in that fight, I did because I was curious. I wanted to see the wooden giant. I wanted to know what the golden armor could take. I paid for that curiosity and intelligence, and I got a bounty out of it, and I would rather have had the secret. The second is that I looked at Raijin, asleep on the deck with his fur flat because he had spent 4 years of charge in 11 minutes, and I understood I had built something with a fuel tank and no fuel pump. He came out of me. He has no organ that makes lightning. He carries what I gave him at birth, and when it is gone, he is a very fast cat. I fixed that within the month. I want to be clear that I only found out because he refused an order and nearly got himself killed, proving a point about what he is for. He has never apologized for it. I have never asked him to. But I did sit down with him afterward and tell him the truth, which is that I did not make him so I would have something to stand in front of me. I made him because I wanted there to be something in this world that was not a mistake. And every single time he throws himself at an admiral to keep my hands clean, he is spending the only irreplaceable thing I have ever built. He listened to all of it, very seriously, and then he said, "Yes, my lord," and I know for a fact he is going to do it again. On the way home, I let Akari pick a few more sea areas off the water chart, and her luck had run out, and we found nothing. Which gave me time to sit with the joke, because the tablet she found me is the dragon one, and the dragon one does 2 things. It makes dragon attacks land twice as hard, and it makes me immune to them. There is exactly one significant dragon in this world. He is enormous, he is blue, he drinks too much, and he is the girl's biological father. Ryuga's daughter had personally located the single object on this planet that neutralizes Ryuga. I have decided this is fine. There is no scenario in which he and I come to that, and if there ever is one, I would rather hold the counter than not. And it is a considerably healthier arrangement than certain other famous adopted father situations, where the adopted son's principal skill was killing adopted fathers. We came back to 2 new chimneys on the skyline and a country that had quietly started working. The elevator brought the ship up into the inland sea, and Alara met us at the dock with paperwork, which is a sentence I would not have believed 18 months earlier. Weapons in mass production. Orchards sprouting. Wages being paid on time. Ryuga took one look at all of it and immediately turned into a dragon and left, because somebody with overwhelming power has to be visibly present in a country you are stealing, and because sitting still gives him a rash. And on the way across the inland sea to our island, Akari threw her club in the water. She had gotten strong enough to overshoot. That was the whole problem. She had been throwing kin at things for months, and it always came back, and this time it went over the rail, and the noise that came out of that child is the loudest thing I heard that year. Riverton went over the side before anyone else had stood up. I know exactly why he did it, and so does he. That is the captain's daughter and my adopted daughter and the future of this entire organization, and she was crying, and there was precisely one man on that deck who could go into the water and come back. He was down there 5 minutes, then 8. Then people started getting nervous. I sent 3 swimmers after him, and all 3 came back up gasping and reported that they could not reach the bottom. Could not find him, could not reach the bottom in an inland sea inside a country. He surfaced eventually with the club in his hand, put it back in the girl's fists, waited for the screaming to stop, and then said this, "My lord, there is something down there." This country is not what it looks like. I went down myself the next morning. I can do that now. That is what the water tablet bought me, and I had not used it for anything except violence in over a year. And I want to tell you what it is like, because I had forgotten I could just look at things. I let the ship go on ahead. I put myself over the side, and I went down. The light goes green, then blue, then nothing, and I kept going, and my range woke up at about the point I stopped being able to see my own legs. Not a tablet, something else. Stone under my feet that was not lake bed. I put my hand on it. It was a roof tile. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did. I was kneeling on a roof, in the dark, 40 meters under an inland sea, inside a country with 1 million people in it, and I was touching a roof tile that somebody had fired in a kiln and laid by hand. I followed the roof line to the edge and dropped off it into a street. There is a street down there. I walked along it. There is a gutter and there are steps up to what were doors, and there is a stone marker at a corner with characters cut into it that I could not read and that Nico Robin has still not fully read. And the whole time I was down there, my chest was doing something I did not like. I have made islands. I have moved oceans. I had never before stood in somebody's town after the water came in. Then I found the wall. Riverton had told me the cliffs are not cliffs, and I had assumed he meant a fortification. He did not mean a fortification. He meant that somebody built a wall around an entire country, all the way round, in a ring, taller than the water is deep, and then the sea came up on the inside of it, or was brought up. That is the version I cannot stop thinking about. I came up out of the water 4 hours later, and Alara was standing on the shore with a towel and a report, and did not ask me a single question, which is why I keep her. Under the water of Wano is a town, buildings, streets, older than the architecture up here, the same style but earlier. And when he swam out to the edges, he found that the cliffs are not cliffs, they are walls. Somebody built an enormous wall all the way around, enclosing a place, and then at some point the water came up and swallowed everything inside it. I asked Alara to find the oldest craftsman in the country and ask about it. She came back with a master carpenter, a genuine legend in that nation, the man they call when a thing has to last a century, and he had never heard of it. Yumi had never heard of it. Baron went and prodded the shogun about it sideways and got nothing but bafflement, and that shogun is not a good enough liar to fool Baron. So 1 million people live on top of a drowned walled city, and not one of them knows. I gave Riverton a permanent second job that day, every week, quietly, off the back of our island, down into the dark, with no air tank and no time limit, mapping it. The carp joke stopped being a joke about then. And then a young man rowed a boat to my island and fell out of it. I want to describe this properly. Purple hair, good clothes, a merchant's posture, and absolutely no idea how an oar works, because in that country, ordinary people pull flat-bottomed boats along canals, and nobody has ever had to cross open water. 2 of my men stood on the dock arguing about whether to help him. He can't capsize, there's no swell here. He capsized. They fished him out, and he stood dripping in front of Alara and made a proposal before anyone offered him a towel. His name is Haruki, second son of a merchant house in the capital, and there was a merchant house until the new shogun's friends came for it. His family's biggest competitor bought influence, the influence bought a ruling, the ruling bankrupted them, and both his parents died of it within the year. He had spent months watching us. And he had worked something out that 4 provincial lords had not. You were brought in by the shogun, Alara said. You do know that. Yes, and that is exactly why I am here. Your dealings with him are not close. Your actions and his goals are fundamentally opposed. He is inflating the currency and rigging the markets and running this country toward a collapse, and you are planting orchards. Those are not the same plan. He was right. He had reasoned his way to it from price movements and coin supply, from a shop counter, without ever leaving a closed country. She had him investigated before answering, and everything checked. And then she gave him 2 men, a flag to show anyone who tried to obstruct him, and a warning. You are clearly clever. Do not be clever at us. And then he refused the easy version. We offered him a salary. Sell our goods, take a percentage, no risk. He said no. He borrowed money from us instead, bought our stock at full price, and told us that in future he would always pay up front. Because, and he said this out loud, a salesman is replaceable. The only reason we needed him at all was that this country will not buy from a foreign face, and that is a problem that solves itself in a few years, and when it solves itself, a salaried man is dead weight. So he intended to be indispensable before that happened. He started with a handcart. That man is going to own half the commerce in that nation, and I wanted on record that the first thing I ever saw him do was fall in the water. Then the newspapers reached us, because they always do, and I got my new bounty. Raijin went on at 270 million, and the photograph is genuinely spectacular. Fur up, eyes lit, lightning coming off him in every direction against a black sky, and Sakura looked at it and said, "So cool," about 9 times, and demanded to be brought along next time. Not until you can last 5 minutes against me. Then next full moon. I can last 5 minutes on the full moon, and I can support you from range. I am extremely good with a bow. She is, actually. She cannot hit a wall with one of our rifles. Genuinely cannot. We have tested this. She is an artist of the near miss. But she does not miss with an arrow inside several hundred meters, and the smiths in the capital have started making longbows for her. Barron's went to 444,440,000. He held that poster and stared at it and said out loud to nobody, "I have been farming. I have been doing research. Why is my number higher than that pervert prince's?" He does not know. He will never know. The reason is that some analyst in a government building decided that the power to hand out abilities must be technology rather than a horse, and that the technology must belong to the fat scientist with the doctorate. And so an innocent man who spent that entire year growing bananas has been priced as a strategic threat. I have not told him. I am never going to tell him. And then there was mine. I want to read this one out exactly the way I read the other one. The hidden one, Arceus, 1,190,000,000 berries, from 5,238,000 times, in one revision. Because a man in golden armor got hit in front of witnesses and went home and told the truth about it, and the analysts applied a policy of no penalty for guessing high. Elara read it twice and then went very quiet, and did not burn anything, which is how I knew she was happy. The crew were considerably louder. 400 pirates found out their god had broken 1 billion, and the celebration lasted 3 days, and Ryuga came home in the middle of it and drank most of it, and was found the next morning asleep in a rice field with a cow standing on him. I took my own poster out onto the roof of my house that night, and I sat with it for a while. I have never done that before. I did not do it for the number. I did it because 11 months of my second life were spent in a drawer with a card on it, and the card said unidentified, and it was correct. I was unidentified. Nobody in that building ever found out what I was, including the men who wrote the card, including the man holding a clipboard when I opened my eyes. And I sat on a roof in a country I had stolen and read a second card that also said unidentified, and I laughed until Elara came up to see what was wrong with me. I did not explain it to her. I'm explaining it to you. But here is the part I keep turning over. They corrected the number. They did not correct the name. The hidden one. That is what they settled on. And the reasoning in the file is that I must be a man in a beast shape concealing his real identity, because obviously nobody would simply be this. They have my abilities half right. They have my rank half right. They have decided I am probably a devil fruit user with a talent for theater. And they have written all of that down and put it in a drawer. They are looking for a man wearing a horse. 19 months ago, I was in a specimen drawer in a building on the other side of the world, cataloged as an unidentified object, listening through 4 inches of shell to 2 children being priced by the kilo. I could not move. I could not speak. I could not put a single finger between them and the schedule. Since then, that building has stopped existing. The organization that hung their people's wings on a wall has stopped existing. The man who wrote the intake logs, and the man who wore the mask, and the man who ran the farm have all stopped existing, and I did every single one of those personally. I said at the start that I do not make promises I cannot fund, so I will not stand here and tell you the wall comes down next year, because it does not. But I have paid the first installments in full on time, and the ledger is open, and the people at the top of that wall have started noticing that their receipts do not add up. I have 7 of 18 pieces of myself. I have a country I do not own yet, with a drowned city under it that nobody will admit exists. I have an air force, a fruit monopoly, a fleet of carp quietly multiplying across the ocean floor, a scientist with an incorrect bounty, a dragon with a prophecy about his own death, and a small girl asleep upstairs with a club she named after nothing. And somewhere out past the waterfall, right now, on the deck of the strongest ship in this ocean, there is a man sailing home. He has been away a long time. He does not know his father is in a cell. He does not know his country signed itself over to me while he was gone. He does not know that I have spent 18 months making sure that when he walks into his own capital, the people cheering will not be cheering for him. His name is Minamoto Kaito, and I have already met the men who will kill him. I hired one of them. I made another one. I built the country he is coming home to. I own the door he has to walk through, and I have spent 18 months teaching 1 million people the name of the man who feeds them, and it is not his. I did not plan that. I want to be honest with you about that at the end, since I have been honest about everything else. I came to that country for a mine and a factory, and I stayed because I found a drowned city under it, and somewhere in the middle of the paperwork, I stopped being a guest. He has been at sea for years. He is famous now. He has a wife and 2 small children waiting in a castle in the mountains, and he is going to walk up that road expecting his father to be alive. I know what is waiting for him. I helped put it there. And the worst part, the part I actually think about, on the roof, with the poster, is that I do not hate him. I have never met the man. Everything I know about him says he is loud and brave and enormously stupid, and that his people would die for him. It is going to be an extremely inconvenient 2 years. So no. I am not going to tell you I feel bad about it. I am going to tell you that I have 7 of 18 pieces of myself, and 11 of them are still out there, and one of them is going to turn up somewhere that costs me something I cannot replace. That is the only prophecy I believe in. Not Ryuga's, mine. Because look at what the cheap ones have already cost me. I got my fire in a drawer, and I paid for it with 11 months of listening. I got my water out of a dead man, and I paid for it by watching a girl fall out of the sky while I stood still. I got my lightning in a crate that my partner bought with fruit. I got my dragon out of a seabed, and I broke a legend's skull with the change. Not one of those was expensive. Not one of them cost me anything I could not replace. I have 11 left. I know how this works. I have been building things all my life, and I know exactly what happens when a run of luck ends, and mine has been going for 2 years, and somewhere out there is a piece of me sitting under something I love. So I am going to keep the church I did not ask for. I am going to keep my ridiculous carp, and my flying lizards, and my bald admiral, and my scientist with the wrong price on his head, and I am going to be extremely heavy by the time the expensive one turns up. I am going to run out of cheap ones eventually.